The gunshot echoed across the frozen mountain just as Clara Whitmore pulled the trigger for the first time in her life. The massive timber wolf collapsed into the blood-stained snow 3 feet from where she stood, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the Winchester. She wasn't supposed to be here. A city girl alone on a Colorado mountain, married to a stranger who didn't want her, protecting animals from predators while running from men far more dangerous than any wolf. But if you stay with me until the end, I'll show you how a woman who couldn't even light a fire became the kind of person empires feared. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let me take you back to where it all started. A frozen train platform where Clara's nightmare was just beginning. The wind coming off the Rockies didn't just blow, it carved. It stripped bark from pine trees and flesh from bone if you were stupid enough to stand against it. Caleb Mercer had stopped being stupid about 15 years ago, right around the time the mountains taught him that survival wasn't about strength. It was about knowing when to bend. He wasn't bending today. Caleb sat rigid on his horse at the Silver Ridge Depot, staring at the afternoon train as it crawled toward the platform like something dying. Steam billowed into the November air, mixing with snow that fell in sheets so thick you couldn't see the mountains anymore. Just white. Just cold. Just the kind of day that made sensible people stay indoors. But Caleb had business. The kind of business that made his jaw tight and his mood worse. He was collecting a wife. Not because he wanted one. Caleb had gotten along just fine for 36 years without needing someone to share his coffee or his silence. But the homestead on Black Ridge was killing him slowly. Too much work for one man, too many winters that left him half dead by spring. His nearest neighbor lived 14 miles down the valley and thought Caleb was crazy for staying up there alone. Maybe he was. The matchmaker in Denver had promised him a sturdy frontier woman, accustomed to hard work and isolation. That's what the letter said. Caleb had sent money, more than he should have, and explicit instructions. He needed someone practical, someone strong, someone who wouldn't cry when the temperature dropped below zero or when the wolves started testing the fence lines. What he didn't need was whatever was currently stepping off that train. The woman who emerged from the passenger car looked like she'd gotten lost on her way to a Boston Tea Party. She wore a dark green velvet coat that might have been expensive once, but was now torn at the sleeve and stained with something that looked like soot. Her hair, some shade of brown he couldn't quite make out under her hat, had come loose from whatever pins were supposed to hold it. She was thin, too thin, the kind of thin that came from not eating regular, not from hard work. She stood on the platform clutching a single battered suitcase, her eyes scanning the depot like she was looking for an escape route. Caleb stayed on his horse and watched her, watched as she shivered inside that ridiculous coat, watched as her breath came out in rapid little clouds that told him she was either terrified or freezing, or both. Watched as her gaze finally landed on him, the only person still waiting at the platform, and something like resignation crossed her face. She knew. She had to know she didn't belong here. Caleb dismounted and walked toward her, his boots crunching through the snow. Up close, she looked even worse. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed like she hadn't slept in days, maybe weeks. There was a bruise on her left cheekbone, faded to yellow-green but still visible. She couldn't have been more than 25. "Clara Whitmore?" His voice came out harsher than he intended. She nodded. "Mr. Mercer? You know any other idiots standing in a blizzard waiting on a train?" She flinched, just slightly. But Caleb saw it. He studied her for another long moment, then turned and walked back toward his horse. "This isn't going to work." "Excuse me? You heard me?" Caleb didn't look back. "I paid for a wife who could handle frontier living. You look like a strong breeze would snap you in half. There's a train heading back east in the morning. I'll pay for your ticket." "No." The word stopped him, not because it was loud, it wasn't, but because of the way she said it, flat, final, like she was stating a fact rather than arguing. Caleb turned around. Clara hadn't moved from her spot on the platform, but something in her posture had shifted. Her chin was up. Her hands were clenched around that pathetic suitcase handle so tight her knuckles had gone white. "No?" he repeated. "I'm not going back. You don't have a choice." "I absolutely do." Her voice was steady now, and there was steel underneath it. "You made a contract with the marriage agency. I fulfilled my end by coming here. If you want to break that contract, you can explain it to them. but I'm not getting back on that train. Caleb felt his temper rising. Lady, you have no idea what you're signing up for. I live 20 miles into the mountains. The nearest town is a half-day ride when the weather's good, which it never is. My cabin's got 4 walls and a stove, and that's about it. No neighbors, no church socials, no whatever fancy things you're used to. Just work and cold and more work. I don't care. You should. I don't. Clara took a step toward him, and Caleb saw something in her eyes that made him pause. It wasn't fear. It was something harder, something that looked like desperation wearing armor. Mr. Mercer, I don't know what you were told about me, and I don't know what you expected, but I came here to start over, and I'm not going back. If you want to send me away, you'll have to physically put me on that train yourself. Otherwise, you can honor your agreement. They stared at each other across the snow-covered platform. The train whistle blew, a long, mournful sound that seemed to emphasize just how alone they were out here. Caleb swore under his breath. This was exactly the kind of complication he didn't need. But she was right about one thing. He had made an agreement. And whatever else he was, Caleb Mercer kept his word. Fine, he said finally. But when you change your mind, and you will, don't expect me to feel sorry for you. I won't. There's a preacher in town. We'll get this done tonight. Clara nodded. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward him without another word. Caleb watched her struggle through the snow in her city boots, not offering to help. If she couldn't handle 100 feet of winter, she definitely couldn't handle Black Ridge. But she made it to his horse without falling. That was something. Bam-de... Wook. The wedding took place in a small church that smelled like old wood and candle wax. The preacher was a thin man named Reverend Miller, who performed frontier marriages with the enthusiasm of someone filling out tax forms. Caleb had been here twice before, once for his parents' funeral, once for a neighbor who died in a mining accident. Now he was here to get married. The ceremony lasted maybe 10 minutes. Clara stood beside him in her torn velvet coat, still shivering. Caleb kept his rifle slung over his shoulder because he didn't trust leaving it on the horse. Neither of them had rings. Neither of them smiled. When Reverend Miller said, "You may kiss the bride," Caleb just nodded at Clara and turned toward the door. "That's it?" Clara asked quietly. "That's it," Caleb confirmed. "You're legally Mrs. Mercer now. Congratulations." The ride up to Black Ridge took 4 hours. 4 hours of brutal cold, narrow trails, and Clara struggling to stay on the mule Caleb had bought for her in town. She didn't complain. He'd give her that much. But he could hear her breathing getting rougher as they climbed higher into the mountains, could see her hands shaking even through her gloves. By the time they reached the cabin, it was full dark. Snow was falling harder, and the temperature had dropped enough that Caleb's beard was crusted with ice. Clara practically fell off her mule, her legs giving out after hours of riding. She caught herself on the fence post, breathing hard. Caleb dismounted and started unloading supplies without looking at her. "Cabin's open. Get inside before you freeze." Clara stumbled toward the structure that was apparently her new home. In the darkness, she probably couldn't see much. That was a mercy. In daylight, she'd realized just how rough it really was. Caleb took his time settling the animals, giving her space to process whatever panic she was feeling. When he finally went inside, he found her standing in the middle of the single room, still wearing her coat, staring at the space like she couldn't quite believe it was real. "There's a bed," Caleb said, pointing to the rough wooden frame in the corner. "You can have it. I'll sleep on the floor." Clara turned to look at him. "This is it? This is the whole cabin? What were you expecting, a ranch house?" "I wasn't expecting—" She trailed off, looking around again, at the rough timber walls, at the simple stove, at the wolf pelts hanging from hooks, at the complete absence of anything that looked comfortable or civilized. "Expected what?" Caleb challenged. But Clara didn't answer. She just walked to the bed, sat down heavily, and put her face in her hands. Caleb watched her for a moment, then turned away. He had work to do. Needed to get a fire going, needed to check the water supply, needed to do a dozen other things that couldn't wait just because he'd brought home a wife who was realizing she'd made a terrible mistake. He built up the fire in the stove until the cabin started to warm. Behind him, Clara was quiet. Too quiet. Caleb figured she was crying, but when he finally glanced back, she was just sitting there, staring at the wall with an expression he couldn't read. "There's beans and cornbread in the larder," he said. "You know how to cook?" "Yes." Then you can make supper. Clara stood up slowly. She took off her coat, revealing a simple gray dress that looked like it had seen better days, and walked to the small shelf that served as Caleb's kitchen. She found the food he'd mentioned, found the pot and pan, and set to work without asking questions. Caleb went back outside to finish with the animals, but he could see her through the window. Her movements were clumsy, uncertain. She clearly knew the theory of cooking, but not the practice. The cornbread came out burned on the bottom, and the beans were underseasoned. But she'd done it. That was something. They ate in silence at the rough wooden table. Clara pushed food around her plate more than she ate it, but Caleb didn't comment. After supper, she cleaned the dishes without being asked, her hands red and raw from the cold water. "Where's the washroom?" she asked finally. Caleb pointed to the door. "Outhouse is about 50 feet that way. Chamber pot's under the bed if it's too cold." He watched realization cross her face. No indoor plumbing. Of course there wasn't. This was the frontier, not Philadelphia. Clara nodded slowly. "I see. And for bathing?" "There's a basin. You heat water on the stove." "Of course." That night, Caleb made a bedroll on the floor near the stove, while Clara changed into a nightgown behind the sheet he'd strung up for privacy. He listened to her move around, heard her get into bed, heard the ropes creak under her weight. Then silence. Caleb stared at the ceiling, wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. This woman wasn't going to last a week. She'd be begging to leave before the first real snow hit. And then he'd be out the money he'd paid, with nothing to show for it but a few days of awkward meals and a wife who looked at his home like it was a prison. He should never have agreed to this. From the bed he heard Clara's breathing change. She was crying now, quiet, controlled sobs that she was clearly trying to muffle. Caleb clenched his jaw and turned over, facing the wall. It wasn't his problem. She'd made her choice. They both had. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it, all the brutal reality of what living on Black Ridge actually meant. But Caleb woke before dawn, the way he always did. He dressed quietly, built up the fire, and slipped outside without waking Clara. There was work to do. There was always work to do. The trap lines needed checking, the woodpile needed reinforcing, and he wanted to scout the upper ridge before the next storm hit. He expected Clara to still be asleep when he got back around noon. Instead, he found her outside, struggling to split firewood with an axe that was too heavy for her. She'd changed into a simpler dress, something made of plain brown fabric that looked more practical than the gray one. Her hair was pulled back in a messy braid, and she was swinging that axe like her life depended on it, even though her form was terrible and she was barely making a dent in the log. Caleb watched from the tree line, watched as she swung and missed, swung and barely connected, swung again and finally split the log, then immediately lost her balance and nearly fell. She didn't see him, just picked up another log, positioned it, and raised the axe again. "You're going to cut your foot off," Caleb called out. Clara spun around, the axe still raised. Her face was flushed from exertion, and there was a determination in her eyes that hadn't been there last night. "I'm trying to help," she said. "By destroying my woodpile?" "By contributing." She lowered the axe. "You said this was a working homestead. I'm working." Caleb walked over and took the axe from her hands. "Not like that, you're not. You're wasting energy and making dangerous cuts. Stand over here." He spent the next 20 minutes showing her the proper way to split wood, how to position the log, how to aim for the cracks, how to use the weight of the axe instead of fighting it. Clara watched intently, asked no stupid questions, and tried again. Her next swing was better, still not good, but better. "Keep practicing," Caleb said, "but not for more than an hour. You'll blister your hands raw." "They're already blistered." She showed him her palms. She was right. The soft skin had already started to bubble and tear from yesterday's work and this morning's attempt at chopping. Caleb swore under his breath. "Why didn't you stop?" "Because the wood needed splitting." "Not at the cost of your hands. You can't work if you're injured." "Then show me how to wrap them." He did, found some clean cloth, and showed her how to protect the worst of the damage while still being able to use her hands. Clara watched carefully, memorizing the technique. She didn't wince when he cleaned the raw spots, didn't complain about the pain that had to be considerable. "You ever done manual labor before?" Caleb asked. "No." "Thought not." He finished wrapping her left hand. What did you do before this? Clara hesitated. I worked in an office. Doing what? Accounting, record keeping, that sort of thing. Caleb looked at her more closely. An accountant. That explained the soft hands, the careful way she moved, the fact that she looked like she'd never been outside a city in her life. What made you leave? Claire's expression shuddered. I needed a fresh start. From what? From my past. She pulled her hand back, flexing her fingers experimentally. Is the interrogation over, or should I expect more questions? There was an edge to her voice now. Caleb recognized it, the sound of someone who'd been pushed far enough. He backed off. Just trying to figure out who I married, he said. You married someone who's here to work. That's all you need to know. Fair enough. Caleb had his own secrets. He couldn't fault her for keeping hers. The days fell into a brutal routine. Caleb would wake before dawn, complete the most urgent tasks, then spend the daylight hours checking trap lines, hunting, or reinforcing the structures that kept them alive. Clara would wake shortly after him, struggle through whatever chores she could manage, and slowly, painfully, learn what frontier survival actually meant. She burned breakfast more often than not. The first time she tried to make bread, it came out hard enough to break teeth. She couldn't carry water without spilling half of it. She misjudged the stove temperature and nearly set the cabin on fire. She got lost walking to the outhouse in a snowstorm, and Caleb had to go find her, following her tracks before they disappeared completely. But she never quit. Every morning, she got up and tried again. Every failure became a lesson. Every mistake got corrected, slowly, awkwardly, but corrected nonetheless. The bread got edible. The water spilling decreased. She learned to read the stove, learned to navigate in snow, learned which job she could handle and which one she needed to leave to Caleb. And she never, not once, asked to leave. Caleb found himself watching her more than he intended to. Not because he was interested, he wasn't, he told himself firmly, but because he couldn't figure her out. Clara Whitmore was clearly educated, clearly from money based on the few possessions she'd brought, clearly had lived a completely different life before stepping off that train. So why was she here? Why was she fighting this hard to stay in a place that was obviously killing her slowly? He asked her once, about 2 weeks in. They were sitting at the table after supper, venison stew that Clara had actually managed to cook properly, and the silence had stretched long enough that Caleb's curiosity won out over his usual reticence. Why aren't you gone yet? Clara looked up from her bowl. Excuse me? You've been here 2 weeks. You've seen what this life is. You're smart enough to know it doesn't get easier, so why are you still here? She was quiet for a long moment, her spoon turning slow circles in her stew. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. Because there's nowhere else to go. You've got family back east, don't you? No? Friends? No. A city full of opportunities? No. Clara set down her spoon. Her hands were still bandaged, though the blisters were starting to heal. Mr. Mercer, I appreciate that you're trying to understand, but the truth is simple. This life, as hard as it is better than what I left behind. That's all you need to know. What could possibly be worse than this? Clara met his eyes then, and Caleb saw something in her gaze that made him regret asking. It was a darkness he recognized, the kind that came from seeing things you couldn't unsee, surviving things you shouldn't have survived. You'd be surprised, she said quietly. After that, Caleb stopped asking, but he started leaving things for her. Small things. Chopped firewood stacked by the door so she didn't have to struggle with the axe. Extra coal for the stove, a pair of work gloves that actually fit her hands. He told himself it was practical. She'd work more efficiently if she had the right tools. But the truth was something else, something he wasn't ready to name yet. Clara noticed. She didn't thank him directly, but she started doing things in return. His clothes, which he'd been washing sporadically at best, started appearing clean and mended. The cabin, which had always been functional but chaotic, started organizing itself. She cooked meals that took into account his preferences. More meat, less seasoning, coffee strong enough to strip paint. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them changed. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was just there. A shared space they both inhabited without friction. 3 weeks in, the first major storm hit. Caleb had been expecting it. You could feel it in the air, see it in how the animals behaved. He spent 2 days reinforcing everything that could blow away, securing the animals, and stocking the cabin with enough supplies to last a week if they got snowed in. Clara helped. Her hands were tougher now, her movements more confident. She'd learned to read weather the way he did, had learned to trust her instincts about when to work fast and when to hunker down. When the storm finally hit, it came with a fury that impressed even Caleb. Wind speeds that bent trees nearly horizontal, snow so thick you couldn't see 3 feet in any direction, temperature that dropped so fast the water in the barrel outside froze solid within an hour. They were trapped inside the cabin together, just the two of them and the howling wind. Caleb expected it to be awkward. Instead, it was almost peaceful. Clara had brought books, 3 of them, carefully protected in her suitcase. She read by the fire while Caleb worked on repairing equipment. Sometimes she'd read passages aloud, and Caleb would listen while his hands stayed busy with leather and metal. On the second day of the storm, the temperature inside the cabin dropped dangerously low, despite the fire burning hot. Caleb could see Clara shivering even under multiple blankets. "Come here," he said. "What?" "You're freezing. Body heat's more efficient than blankets. Come here." Clara hesitated, then moved closer to where Caleb sat near the stove. He shifted to make room, and she settled beside him, still wrapped in her blankets but now sharing the warmth of his larger frame. They sat like that for hours, not speaking, just existing in the same space, sharing warmth while the storm tried its best to kill them both. And something shifted. Caleb couldn't name it, couldn't explain it, but sitting there with Clara pressed against his side, listening to her breathe, feeling her gradually stop shivering, it did something to the cold that had lived in his chest for longer than he could remember. "Thank you," Clara said softly. "For what?" "For not sending me back. For giving me a chance." Caleb didn't answer. Didn't know how to explain that she'd somehow become less of an obligation and more of something else. Something that scared him more than any blizzard. The storm finally broke on the 3rd day. Caleb went outside to assess the damage and found they'd been buried under nearly 4 feet of snow. It took him most of the morning to dig out the cabin door and create a path to the animals. When he came back inside, he found Clara cooking breakfast. Real breakfast, the kind with eggs and salt pork and coffee that didn't taste like dirt. She'd somehow made the cabin feel warmer, brighter, less like a survival shelter and more like a home. "Everything okay out there?" she asked. "We lost some shingles on the lean-to. I'll need to repair them before the next storm." "Can I help?" Caleb almost said no. But then he looked at her, really looked at her. At the woman who'd arrived a month ago looking like she'd blow away in a strong wind. Clara stood straighter now. Her hands were calloused. Her face had color from spending time outside. She wore practical clothes and boots that Caleb had helped her trade for in town. She'd learned to split wood, haul water, tend animals, and survive temperatures that killed unprepared people every winter. She wasn't the woman who'd gotten off that train anymore. "Yeah," Caleb said. "You can help." Clara smiled. It was the first real smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. Caleb turned away quickly, unsettled by how much that smile affected him. They spent the afternoon repairing storm damage. Clara proved surprisingly handy once she understood what needed doing. She held boards steady while Caleb hammered, passed him tools without being asked, and anticipated problems before they became serious. "You're getting good at this," Caleb said. "I have a good teacher." "I've barely taught you anything." "You've taught me everything." Clara positioned another board. "Whether you meant to or not." That evening, they shared supper in comfortable quiet. Caleb found himself watching Clara again, the way she moved around the cabin with increasing confidence, the way she'd stopped flinching at every loud noise, the way she looked at the mountains through the window with something that might have been appreciation instead of fear. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said suddenly. "Depends on the question." "Why did you want a wife, really?" Caleb considered lying, considered giving her some version of the truth that was easier to swallow. But Clara had been honest with him about her limitations, her failures, her determination to stay. She deserved honesty in return. "I was lonely," he said simply. "Didn't realize how lonely until I'd been up here alone for too many winters. Thought having someone around might make it easier." "Does it?" Caleb met her eyes across the table. "Yeah, it does." Clara nodded slowly. "Good. Because I was lonely too." Different kind of lonely, maybe, but lonely all the same. Not anymore. Not anymore. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of what was growing in the space they shared. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that might become love, given time and patience and the kind of trust that only formed when two people survived hell together. Caleb stood up abruptly. I need to check the trap lines tomorrow. You should stay here. Can I come with you instead? It's a full day's ride, rough terrain. I can handle it. Caleb started to argue, then stopped. A month ago, he would have said absolutely not. But Clara had proven herself over and over. She'd earned the right to make her own choices about what she could handle. We leave at first light, he said. Dress warm. Clara's smile could have lit the entire cabin. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Caleb saddled both horses while Clara packed supplies: food, water, emergency gear. She'd learned what mattered, what could save your life if things went wrong. They rode out together into the frozen wilderness. Clara kept pace easily now, comfortable in the saddle, reading the terrain the way Caleb had taught her. They didn't talk much, but the silence was companionable. The trap lines yielded 2 rabbits and a fox. Caleb showed Clara how to reset the traps, how to read animal signs, how to move through the forest without disturbing the delicate balance of predator and prey. She absorbed it all with the same focused intensity she brought to everything. On the ride back, they stopped to rest the horses by a frozen stream. Caleb built a small fire while Clara unpacked their lunch. They ate together, watching the smoke rise into the crystalline air. I never thought I could do this, Clara said quietly. Do what? Any of it. Survive out here. Learn to work with my hands. Feel at peace. Are you at peace? Clara considered the question. Getting there. What about you? Caleb looked at her. This woman who'd appeared in his life like an unwanted complication and somehow become essential to it. Yeah, I think I am. They rode back to the cabin as the sun started setting, painting the snow in shades of gold and orange. Caleb found himself thinking about how empty the homestead had felt before Clara arrived, and how difficult it was to imagine it without her now. That night, as they settled into their respective sleeping spaces, Caleb made a decision. Clara? Yes? You can have the bed permanently. I'll build myself a proper frame on the other side of the cabin. You don't have to, I know, but I'm going to anyway. In the darkness, he heard her soft laugh. Okay, thank you. You're welcome. Caleb closed his eyes and listened to Clara's breathing even out as she fell asleep. The cabin felt warmer than it had in years. Not from the fire, from something else entirely. He was still lying there, thinking about the woman sleeping 10 feet away and what her presence meant when he heard the first howl. Then another. Then a chorus of them, echoing across the mountain. Wolves. And they were close. Caleb sat up slowly, reaching for his rifle. From the bed, he heard Clara's breathing change. She was awake too, listening to the predators circling their homestead. How many? She whispered. At least 5. Maybe more. What do they want? Caleb moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. He could see shapes moving through the trees, large shadows with eyes that reflected the moonlight. They're hungry, he said, and they're testing our defenses. The wolves howled again, closer now. Caleb could hear the mules shifting nervously in their shelter, could feel the tension building in the cold night air. Stay inside, he told Clara, no matter what you hear. Where are you going? To make sure they don't get the animals. Caleb grabbed his rifle and his heavy coat. He was almost to the door when Clara's voice stopped him. Be careful. He turned back. She was sitting up in bed, her eyes wide but steady, not panicked, trusting him to handle this. Always am, Caleb said. Then he stepped out into the frozen night to face the wolves alone. The cold hit Caleb like a physical blow the moment he stepped outside. 20 below, maybe colder. The kind of temperature that froze moisture in your lungs if you breathed wrong. But he'd lived through worse, and right now the wolves circling his property were a bigger threat than the weather. He could see them more clearly now. 7, maybe 8 shadows moving between the trees. Their eyes caught the moonlight in flashes of green and gold. They were big. Timber wolves, probably down from the higher elevations where the hunting had gotten too scarce. Desperation made animals dangerous, made them willing to take risks they'd normally avoid. like attacking a homestead with armed humans. Caleb moved toward the mule shelter, his rifle ready but not raised. No point wasting ammunition on warning shots. These wolves would either respect the boundary or they wouldn't. His job was to make sure they chose respect. The alpha separated from the pack as Caleb approached. Massive thing, easily 140 pounds, with gray fur that looked silver in the moonlight. It stood between Caleb and the shelter, head low, watching him with the kind of intelligence that made his skin crawl. "Get," Caleb said, not shouting, just firm. The wolf didn't move. Behind it, the pack shifted closer. Caleb could hear the mules now, stamping and snorting in fear. If the fence broke, if the wolves got in, he'd lose everything. The mules weren't just transportation. They were his lifeline to civilization, his ability to haul timber and supplies, his insurance against being completely stranded on this mountain. "I said get." Caleb raised the rifle now, sighting down the barrel at the alpha. The wolf's lips pulled back, showing teeth. Then something crashed in the cabin behind him. Caleb's concentration broke for just a second, just long enough to glance back at the window where he could see Clara moving inside. And in that second, the alpha charged. Caleb swung the rifle back around and fired. The shot went wide, hitting a tree trunk 2 feet to the left of the wolf. The alpha veered off at the sound, and the rest of the pack scattered into the darkness. But they didn't go far. Caleb could still see them out there, circling, waiting. He backed toward the cabin, keeping the rifle up. The wolves followed his movement, but kept their distance. For now. When Caleb got back inside, he found Clara standing by the window with his spare rifle in her hands. "I told you to stay in bed," he said. "I heard the shot. I thought—" Clara stopped, lowering the rifle. "Are they gone?" "No, they're just waiting." Caleb moved to the other window, scanning the tree line. "They're hungry enough to be bold, but not stupid enough to rush a man with a gun. Not yet." "What do we do?" "We wait. Keep the fire burning, keep watch. They'll move on eventually." But even as he said it, Caleb felt uneasy. These wolves were too focused, too determined. They'd been pushed down from their normal territory by something: starvation, competition, maybe another pack. Whatever the reason, they weren't acting like wolves that would give up easily. Clara set the spare rifle against the wall and moved to build up the fire. Her hands were steady, Caleb noticed. No shaking, no panic. She'd heard wolves before. Everyone on the frontier had. But hearing them from inside a cabin was different from knowing they were right outside, testing your defenses. "You ever shot a rifle?" Caleb asked. "No." "Might want to learn." Clara looked at him. "You think it's going to come to that?" "I think being prepared never hurt anyone." They spent the rest of the night in shifts. Caleb took first watch while Clara tried to sleep, though he could tell from her breathing she wasn't having much success. The wolves prowled the perimeter, their howls echoing across the mountain. Every few hours, one would test the boundary, get close enough to the mule shelter that Caleb had to step outside and fire a warning shot. By dawn, he'd used 6 bullets and the wolves were still there. "This isn't normal," Clara said over breakfast. She'd made coffee strong enough to strip rust in some kind of fried bread that was actually edible. "No, it's not." "So what's different?" Caleb considered the question. "Could be a lot of things. Maybe their normal prey moved to lower elevations. Maybe we had a bad summer and the deer population crashed. Maybe there's a bigger pack up north pushing them into our territory. Or maybe they're just hungry enough to be stupid." "That too." Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "How long can we keep this up? The warning shots, I mean." "As long as we have ammunition, which is a while but not infinite." "And if they're still here when we run out?" Caleb met her eyes. "Then we make harder choices." Over the next 3 days, the siege continued. The wolves never left. They'd retreat during the day, disappear into the forest where Caleb couldn't track them without leaving Clara alone. But every night they'd come back, circling closer, testing the defenses with increasing boldness. Caleb started sleeping in 2-hour shifts, never fully resting. Clara took watches too, sitting by the window with the rifle across her lap, even though she couldn't shoot it. The constant tension wore them both down. Caleb could see it in the dark circles under Clara's eyes, could feel it in his own short temper and frayed nerves. On the 4th morning, Clara made a suggestion. "Teach me to shoot." Caleb looked up from cleaning his rifle. "Now." "Why not? You said yourself I should learn. And if something happens to you, nothing's going to happen to me." But if it does, Claire's voice was firm. If you get hurt or sick, or if those wolves find a way in while you're checking the trap lines, I need to be able to protect myself. Protect us. She was right. Caleb hated that she was right. Hated the implication that he might not be able to handle this himself. But pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. Fine, he said. Get your coat. They went outside in the pale morning light. The wolves were gone, probably sleeping off the night's activities, but their tracks were everywhere. Deep prints in the snow, evidence of how many times they'd circled the cabin, how close they'd gotten. Caleb set up a target against a tree about 30 yards out. Just a piece of wood with a charcoal mark on it, nothing fancy. First thing you need to know, he said, handing Clara the Winchester, is that a rifle's not like a pistol. It's got kick. If you're not ready for it, it'll knock you on your ass. Clara hefted the weapon, testing its weight. How do I get ready for it? Plant your feet, brace yourself, and for the love of don't close your eyes when you pull the trigger. He showed her the basics, how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze instead of jerking the trigger. Clara listened with the same focused intensity she brought to everything, asking questions when she didn't understand, trying again when she got it wrong. Her first shot went wide by about 15 feet. Her second shot hit the tree but missed the mark. Her third shot came close enough that Caleb felt something like approval. Not bad, he said. It's terrible. It's better than most people do their first time. Caleb adjusted her stance slightly. Try again. And remember, the rifle wants to jump up and to the right. Compensate for it. Clara fired again. This time she hit the mark dead center. She lowered the rifle slowly, staring at the target like she couldn't quite believe what she'd done. I did it. You did. I actually hit it. Don't let it go to your head. That was a stationary target in good light with no pressure. Real shooting's different. But even as he said it, Caleb felt something shift. Clara had crossed another threshold. She wasn't just surviving on this mountain anymore. She was learning to fight for her place here. They practiced for another hour before the cold drove them back inside. Clara's shoulder was already bruising from the recoil, but she didn't complain. Just helped Caleb prepare lunch and ask questions about windage and bullet drop like she was studying for an exam. That night, the wolves came back with reinforcements. Caleb counted 12 of them now. A full pack, unified and coordinated in a way that made his blood run cold. They'd been testing before. Now they were hunting. Stay inside, Caleb told Clara. No matter what happens. Caleb, I mean it. They're organized now. This isn't random anymore. He went outside with both rifles and enough ammunition to hold off an army. The wolves waited just beyond the tree line, their eyes reflecting the firelight from the cabin windows. The alpha stood at the front, that same massive gray beast that had charged him days ago. They stared at each other across 50 feet of frozen ground. Then the alpha howled, and the pack surged forward. Caleb fired into the mass of fur and teeth. One wolf went down, then another. But the rest kept coming, spreading out, trying to flank him. He heard the mules screaming in their shelter, heard the fence boards cracking under the weight of wolves throwing themselves against it. He couldn't be everywhere at once. A wolf got past him, racing toward the mule shelter. Caleb spun and fired, catching it mid-stride. The animal tumbled into the snow and didn't get up, but two more had taken its place, and his ammunition was running low. The fence splintered, broke. The wolves poured through the gap. Caleb ran toward the shelter, firing as he went. He dropped one wolf, then another, but there were too many, moving too fast. He could see the mules inside, trapped and terrified, and he knew with sick certainty that he was about to lose everything he'd worked for. Then a shot rang out from behind him. One of the wolves attacking the shelter dropped instantly, blood blooming across its chest. Caleb spun around and saw Clara standing in the cabin doorway, the Winchester raised to her shoulder, her face pale but determined. "Get down!" he shouted. But Clara didn't get down. She sighted down the barrel and fired again, hitting another wolf that had been circling toward Caleb's blind side. The remaining wolves scattered, not far, just back to the tree line, regrouping. But it was enough. Caleb used the breathing room to get between them and the shelter, his rifle up and ready. "I told you to stay inside," he said without looking at Clara. "And I told you I needed to learn to shoot." Her voice was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off. Did I kill them?" "Yeah." "Good." Caleb almost laughed. Almost. But the situation was too serious, the danger too real. The wolves were still there, still watching, and now they knew there were two armed humans instead of one. Clara walked toward him, her boots crunching in the snow. She'd grabbed her coat but hadn't buttoned it, and she was shivering hard. "How many bullets do we have left?" she asked. Caleb did the math in his head. Maybe 30 between both rifles, plus another dozen for the pistol. "And how many wolves?" "8 now that you dropped 2. Clara nodded. "So we have enough. If we don't miss." "We can't not miss. Nobody's that good." "Then we need a better plan than standing out here shooting until we run out of ammunition." She was right again. Caleb hated that she kept being right. They retreated to the cabin, barricading the door and windows. The wolves didn't attack again that night, but Caleb could feel them out there, waiting, planning. These weren't normal wolves anymore. They'd crossed some line from animal into something more desperate, more dangerous. "We need to repair that fence," Claire said, "before they come back." "It's dark. We can't see to work." "Then we do it at first light, fast, before they realize what we're doing." Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd arrived on his mountain not knowing how to split firewood, and was now strategizing against a wolf pack like a military commander. "When did you get so brave, then?" he asked. Clara's laugh was bitter. "I'm not brave. I'm terrified. But being scared and being helpless aren't the same thing." They worked through the night, taking turns sleeping and watching. At dawn, they went outside together with tools and fresh timber. The wolves watched from the forest but didn't approach. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they were learning. Caleb and Clara worked fast, replacing the broken fence boards, reinforcing the weak points. Clara handed him nails without being asked, held boards steady while he hammered, moved with an efficiency born from weeks of working together. They finished just as the sun broke over the eastern ridge. The fence wasn't pretty, but it was strong enough to hold. "That'll do," Caleb said, testing the boards. "Will it be enough?" "Has to be." They went back inside and Clara collapsed into a chair, exhausted. Caleb built up the fire and put coffee on to boil. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say? They were trapped on this mountain with a pack of starving wolves, limited ammunition, and winter tightening its grip with every passing day. "I shot them," Clara said quietly. "Those wolves. I killed them." "You did." "I've never killed anything before." Caleb poured coffee and handed her a cup. "First time's always hard. Does it get easier?" "No, you just get better at living with it." Clara wrapped her hands around the cup, staring into the dark liquid. "Back east, I had this idea about the frontier. I thought it would be, I don't know, simpler, cleaner. You work hard, you survive. End of story." "It's not? It's more complicated than that. Everything out here is about choosing what dies so you can live. The wood you burn was a tree. The meat you eat was an animal. Those wolves, they were just trying to survive too. But them surviving meant us dying. So you made the choice," Caleb finished. "That's what survival is. Making choices you can live with." "Can you live with them?" Caleb thought about all the things he'd done to stay alive on this mountain, all the animals he'd killed, the trees he'd cut, the brutal calculus of frontier existence. "Most days," he said honestly. "Some days are harder than others." Clara nodded slowly. She understood. That was the thing about her. She understood things Caleb couldn't explain, saw connections he'd stopped noticing years ago. 3 more days passed. The wolves stayed in the forest, visible but distant. Caleb didn't trust it. Animals that determined didn't just give up. They were planning something, or waiting for something, or... "Caleb!" Clara's voice was sharp. "Look!" She was pointing at the sky. Dark clouds were rolling in from the north, moving fast. The kind of clouds that meant a serious storm, the kind that could bury them for a week. "That's coming in tonight," Caleb said. "Maybe sooner." "What about the wolves?" "They'll den up, ride it out like everything else." But even as he said it, Caleb felt uneasy. Something about this didn't add up. The wolves' behavior, the timing of the storm, the way everything seemed to be converging at once. They spent the afternoon preparing, securing everything that could blow away, stacking extra firewood inside, filling water containers before the pump froze solid. Clara worked alongside Caleb without complaint, her movements practiced now, her body adapted to the brutal physical demands of mountain life. The storm hit just after dark. Wind that sounded like a freight train. Snow that came sideways and then upside down. Temperature that dropped so fast Caleb could watch the frost spreading across the inside of the windows. They huddled by the fire, burning through wood faster than Caleb liked, but unable to survive without the heat. Clara had pulled every blanket they owned into a nest by the stove. They sat together in that small circle of warmth while the world outside tried to kill them. "Tell me something," Clara said after hours of silence. "Like what?" "Anything. I've been here almost 2 months and I barely know you." Caleb considered deflecting. He was good at that. But the storm had trapped them here together, and Clara had earned the right to ask questions. "What do you want to know?" "Why did you come up here, to Black Ridge?" "My parents had the homestead. I inherited it when they died." "You could have sold it, gone somewhere easier." "I could have." Caleb fed another log to the fire. "Didn't want to." "Why not?" "Because—" He stopped, trying to find words for something he'd never said out loud. "Because up here, things make sense. You work, you survive. You don't work, you die. No politics, no games, no people pretending to be something they're not. Just you and the mountain and the truth." Clara was quiet for a moment. "That sounds lonely." "It was. Is." Caleb glanced at her. "Was. Past tense?" "Things change." Clara smiled slightly. "They do, don't they?" The storm raged for 3 days. 3 days of being trapped inside, of carefully rationing their firewood, of sleeping in shifts to keep the stove fed. Clara read to Caleb from her books. Adventure stories mostly, tales of explorers and treasure hunters that seemed absurd compared to their own reality. But Caleb found he didn't mind. There was something comforting about her voice, about the shared activity, about not being alone in the darkness. On the third night, the wind finally died down. The temperature was still brutal, but the snow had stopped and the sky was clearing. Caleb went to the window and looked out at a world transformed into an alien landscape. Everything was buried, drifts 10 feet high against the cabin walls, trees bent under the weight of ice and snow. And no sign of the wolves. "They're gone," Clara said, coming to stand beside him. "Maybe." "You don't think so?" "I think we won't know until we dig out and check." They started digging at first light. It took hours to create a path to the mule shelter, to check on the animals, to assess the damage. The mules had survived, frightened and hungry, but alive. The fence had held, and there were no wolf tracks anywhere in the fresh snow. "They really are gone," Clara said, staring out at the empty forest. Caleb wanted to believe her, but something in his gut said this wasn't over. 2 days later, he found out he was right. He'd gone to check the trap lines, the first time in over a week that he'd felt safe leaving Clara alone. The morning was clear and cold, the kind of brutal bright day where the sun hurt your eyes but provided no warmth. Caleb worked his way along the ridge, checking each trap, resetting the ones that had been buried by the storm. He was about 3 miles from the cabin when he saw the tracks. Not wolf tracks, boot prints, human boot prints, fresh in the snow, leading up from the valley. Caleb's hand went to his rifle. Up here, unexpected visitors usually meant trouble. Could be lost travelers, but that was unlikely in winter. Could be hunters, but they'd have no reason to be on his land. Could be. He followed the tracks carefully, moving quiet through the trees. They led east, roughly parallel to his own route, but staying in the cover of the forest. Whoever made them knew how to move without being seen. That raised every alarm bell Caleb had. The tracks eventually led to a clearing about a mile from his cabin. And there, sitting around a hastily built fire, were 3 men. Caleb recognized the type immediately. Rough clothes, hard faces, the kind of men who made their living on the wrong side of the law. One of them was cleaning a pistol. Another was studying a piece of paper that looked like a map. The third was scanning the tree line with eyes that had seen violence and inflicted plenty of it. Caleb backed away slowly, his heart pounding. He made it about 50 feet before a voice called out, "You can come out! We know you're there!" Caleb froze. Every instinct said run, but running would just confirm he had something to hide. So he stepped into the clearing, his rifle held casually but ready. "Lost?" he asked. The man with the map stood up. He was tall, well-dressed for the frontier, with a face that might have been handsome except for the cold intelligence in his eyes. "Not lost," the man said. "Looking for someone." This is private land. We're aware. We're also aware a woman matching our description arrived here about 2 months ago. Clara Whitmore. Ring any bells? Caleb kept his expression neutral. Don't know the name. No? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's unfortunate, because we have reason to believe she married a trapper named Caleb Mercer. And unless I'm mistaken, that would be you. Who are you? Name's Victor Crow. I'm a detective with the Pinkerton Agency. He reached into his coat slowly, showing Caleb a badge. I'm here on behalf of a client who wants Mrs. Mercer returned to Denver, along with certain property she stole. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Crow nodded to his companions. These are my associates. We've been searching for Mrs. Mercer for quite some time. Imagine our surprise when we learned she'd gotten married and disappeared into the mountains. Clever woman. Almost worked, too. Caleb's mind was racing. Claire had said she was running from something. She'd said going back east was worse than dying in the Rockies. But she'd never mentioned theft, never mentioned Pinkertons, never mentioned anything that would bring armed men to his mountain. Even if I knew this woman, Caleb said carefully, I'm not sure why I'd help you find her. Because the alternative is being charged as an accessory to theft and fraud. Because my client is a very powerful man who doesn't like being crossed. Because... Crow's smile widened. You strike me as a practical man, Mr. Mercer. And practically speaking, you can't win this fight. Maybe not, but I can make it expensive. Crow laughed. I was hoping you'd say that. Makes things more interesting. He gestured to the forest behind Caleb. We know where your cabin is. We know your wife is there, probably alone right now. We could go have a conversation with her directly. But I thought I'd extend you the courtesy of cooperation first, professional to professional. Caleb's grip tightened on his rifle. What do you want? The ledgers Mrs. Mercer stole, and Mrs. Mercer herself to answer for her crimes. And if I don't have either of those things, then we'll search your property until we find them. And if you interfere... Crow let the threat hang in the air. Caleb stared at the three men. They were armed, professional, and clearly prepared for violence. He could maybe take one of them, possibly two if he was lucky. But all three? Not a chance. I need to think about it, he said. Of course. Take all the time you need. Crow sat back down by the fire. We'll be right here. But Mr. Mercer, don't take too long. My patience isn't infinite. Caleb backed away slowly, keeping his rifle ready until he was out of sight. Then he ran. He covered the mile back to his cabin in record time, his breath coming in ragged gasps that had nothing to do with exertion. Clara was in danger. Real danger. The kind that made wolves look like a minor inconvenience. And Caleb had no idea how to protect her. He burst through the cabin door. Clara was at the stove making lunch. She turned at his entrance, her expression shifting immediately from surprise to alarm. What's wrong? Get your things, Caleb said. Everything important. We need to leave. Now. What? Why? Because there are 3 men camped a mile from here, and they're looking for you. All the color drained from Clara's face. Pinkertons? Yeah, led by a man named Crow. He says you stole something, says his client wants you back in Denver. Clara's hands started shaking. She sat down hard in the nearest chair, looking like she might be sick. He found me, she whispered. I didn't think... I was so careful. Clara. Caleb knelt in front of her, forcing her to meet his eyes. I need you to tell me the truth, right now. What did you steal? Clara took a shuddering breath. Ledgers, account books, evidence of crimes. What kind of crimes? Murder, theft, bribery, everything. She was talking faster now, words tumbling out like a dam breaking. I worked for Edwin Barron. He's a railroad tycoon, one of the richest men in the country. I kept his books, managed his accounts, and I saw everything he did, every bribe he paid, every piece of land he stole, every person he had killed when they got in his way. And you took evidence of this? Yes. The ledgers are in my suitcase, hidden in the lining. I was going to take them to the federal judge in Denver, the only one Barron doesn't own. But I needed to disappear first, needed time for people to stop looking. The marriage agency seemed like the perfect cover. Caleb sat back on his heels. You used me. Yes. Claire's eyes were wet. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but I am. I didn't mean for you to get dragged into this. I thought I had more time. How bad is it? What Baron did. Bad enough that if these ledgers reach the right people, his entire empire collapses. He goes to prison, his associates go to prison, and dozens of families get justice for what he did to them. Clara wiped her eyes angrily. But that only matters if I can actually get the evidence to Denver. And now you've got Pinkertons on your trail and a railroad tycoon who wants you dead. Yes. Caleb stood up and walked to the window. He could see the forest, the mountains, the life he'd built here through brutal years of survival. Everything he owned was in this cabin, everything he'd worked for. And now Clara was asking him to risk it all. No. That wasn't fair. She wasn't asking anything. If anything, she'd probably tell him to hand her over, save himself. That's what a practical person would do. Give Crow what he wanted, go back to his solitary life, forget Clara Whitmore ever existed. But Caleb had spent 2 months watching this woman transform from a terrified refugee into someone who could face down wolves without flinching. He'd seen her work until her hands bled. He'd felt her warmth during the storm, heard her voice in the darkness, learned what it meant to not be alone. And somewhere along the way, she'd stopped being an obligation. She'd become his. Get the ledgers, Caleb said. What? The ledgers. Get them. We're taking them to Denver. Clara stood up slowly. Caleb, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to. He turned from the window to face her. You're my wife. Maybe that started as a piece of paper, but it's more than that now. And I don't let anyone take what's mine. Something broke in Clara's expression. Relief, gratitude, and something deeper that Caleb didn't have words for. They'll kill you, she said. They can try. I'm serious. Baron doesn't let loose ends survive. If you help me, then I help you. Caleb moved to start gathering supplies. We've got maybe an hour before Crow gets impatient. We need to be gone before then. Where do we go? Down the mountain. There's a trail on the east side, harder to follow. We make it to Georgetown. We can get word to the federal marshal, maybe get protection long enough to reach Denver. Clara pulled her suitcase from under the bed and started packing. Her hands were steadier now, her movements quick and efficient. What about the cabin? Your animals? Can't take them, moving too fast. Caleb hated saying it, hated abandoning everything he'd built. But staying meant dying, and taking Clara meant choosing something bigger than his own survival. They worked in silence, packing only what they could carry. Food, ammunition, blankets. Clara retrieved the ledgers from their hiding place, 3 leather-bound books that didn't look like much but apparently contained enough evidence to destroy an empire. Caleb was loading the last of their supplies when he heard it. Voices outside. Close. Too late, he said quietly. Clara froze. What do we do? Caleb grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. He could see movement through the trees, Crow and his men, approaching the cabin from multiple directions. They'd gotten impatient, or maybe they'd been planning to attack all along and the whole conversation was just theater. Either way, there was no running now. Can you shoot? Caleb asked. Clara picked up the Winchester. I can try. That'll have to be good enough. Caleb checked his ammunition one more time. 32 bullets between both rifles. 3 armed men outside. The math wasn't good, but it was the math they had. Stay away from the windows, Caleb said. Only shoot if you have a clear target. Make every bullet count. Clara nodded. Her face was pale but determined. They waited. Outside, Crow's voice called out, Mr. Mercer, I think we've waited long enough. Send out Mrs. Mercer and the ledgers, and we can all walk away from this. Caleb didn't answer. Come now, be reasonable. You're outnumbered and outgunned. This doesn't have to end badly. Still, Caleb stayed silent. Then a gunshot shattered the window behind him, spraying glass across the cabin floor. The siege had begun. Caleb hit the floor as glass rained down, pulling Clara with him. Another shot punched through the front wall, splintering timber 6 inches from where his head had been. These weren't warning shots anymore. Crow had stopped pretending this could end peacefully. Stay low, Caleb hissed. He crawled to the broken window and risked a quick look outside. One of Crow's men was positioned behind the woodpile. Another had taken cover near the mule shelter. He couldn't see the third, which meant the bastard was probably circling around to the back. Can you see Crow? Clara asked. She'd moved to the opposite wall, the Winchester held tight against her shoulder like Caleb had taught her. No, he's smart enough to stay out of sight. Caleb fired a shot toward the woodpile. It hit nothing but timber, but it forced the man there to duck down. We need to make them think twice about rushing us. Another volley of shots hit the cabin. One bullet tore through the door. Another shattered the remaining window glass. Clara flinched but held her position. "How much ammunition do they have?" she asked. "More than us, probably." Caleb reloaded quickly. "But they can't keep this up forever either. Bullets are expensive, and Crow strikes me as the type who counts costs. So we wait them out? We try." But even as he said it, Caleb knew waiting wasn't a real option. Crow had all the time in the world. They didn't. Eventually, the ammunition would run out, or the cabin would take enough damage to become indefensible, or Crow would just set the place on fire and shoot them as they ran. They needed an advantage, something Crow wasn't expecting. "The back wall," Caleb said suddenly. "There's a gap in the chinking behind the bed, big enough to squeeze through if you're small." Clara looked at him. "You want me to run?" "I want you to get those ledgers somewhere safe. This fight's about keeping you alive long enough to expose Baron. If we both die here, he wins." "I'm not leaving you." "Clara, I said I'm not leaving." Her voice was firm. "We survive this together, or we don't survive at all. Those are the only two options." Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to make her see reason, but he recognized that tone. It was the same one she'd used on the train platform when she'd refused to go back east. Clara had made her decision, and no amount of logic would change it. "Fine," he said. "Then we need a better plan than sitting here getting shot at." "What about the blasting powder?" Caleb turned to look at her. "What about it? You said you use it for clearing stumps. How much do you have?" "Maybe 5 pounds. Why?" Clara's eyes were bright with an idea that was either brilliant or insane. "If we can't shoot our way out, maybe we can blast our way out. Create enough chaos that we can make a run for the horses. The horses are in the shelter, which is currently pinned down by gunfire. So we create a diversion, something big enough to make them scatter." Caleb considered it. The blasting powder was stored in a metal canister under the floorboards, far enough from the stove that it wouldn't accidentally ignite, close enough that he could reach it. If he could rig up a charge, time it right, throw it far enough. "It might work," he said slowly. "But the timing has to be perfect. We set it off too soon, they'll just regroup. Too late, and we're already dead." "Then we don't get the timing wrong." Outside, the shooting had stopped. Caleb didn't like that. Silence meant Crow was planning something, and whatever it was, it probably wouldn't be good for them. "Mr. Mercer," Crow's voice carried across the clearing. "I'm going to make this very simple. You have 5 minutes to send out Mrs. Mercer. After that, we burn you out." "He's bluffing," Claire said. "Maybe. Or maybe he's exactly the kind of man who'd burn down a cabin with people inside." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "If you give me to them, do you think they'd let you live?" "It doesn't matter. I'm not giving you to them." "Caleb, I said I'm not doing it." Caleb moved away from the window and started prying up the floorboard that hid the blasting powder. "We're going with your plan. Help me rig this charge." They worked quickly. Caleb showed Clara how to measure the powder, how to pack it tight, how to create a fuse that would burn for exactly 30 seconds. She learned fast, her accountant's precision serving her well. Within minutes, they had a charge that could blow a crater in the frozen ground and hopefully scatter Crow's men long enough for an escape. "Where do we throw it?" Clara asked. "Your arm." Caleb studied the layout outside. The woodpile was directly in front, the mule shelter to the left. Crow's men were positioned to cover both approaches. But if he threw the charge toward the right, toward the tree line, "There," he said, pointing. "That stand of pines. Close enough to the clearing that the blast will spook them, far enough that it won't hit us. And then? Then we run like hell for the shelter, get the horses, and ride down the mountain before they recover." "That's not much of a plan." "It's the plan we've got." Outside, something was burning. Caleb could smell it, oil and pitch, the kind of smell that meant torches. Crow wasn't bluffing after all. "They're going to fire the cabin," Clara said, her voice tight. "I know. Get ready to move." Caleb positioned himself by the door, the charge in one hand, a lit candle in the other. His heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. This was it. One chance. If the fuse didn't light, if the throw was short, if Crow's men recovered too quickly. He didn't finish the thought. "On 3, he told Clara. 1, something hit the roof. Then another something. The smell of smoke got stronger. 2. Clara moved to his side, the Winchester ready. 3. Caleb kicked open the door and hurled the charge toward the tree line. The fuse caught, a bright spark in the darkness. He had maybe 20 seconds before gunfire erupted. Caleb felt something tug at his coat as he dove back inside. Clara fired twice, her shots going wild but forcing Crow's men to duck. The cabin was filling with smoke now, flames spreading across the dry cedar roof with terrifying speed. "Get out!" Caleb shouted. "Back door! Now!" They scrambled toward the bed, Clara going first through the gap in the wall. Caleb followed, his shoulders barely fitting through the opening. Behind them, the cabin was becoming an inferno. They hit the ground outside just as the charge exploded. The blast was massive, bigger than Caleb had expected. Trees shattered, snow erupted in a fountain of white, and the concussion wave hit hard enough to knock both of them flat. Caleb's ears rang. Through the high-pitched whine, he could hear shouting, confusion, the sound of men who just had their positions obliterated. "Move!" he gasped, pulling Clara to her feet. They ran through the smoke and chaos toward the mule shelter. Caleb could see one of Crow's men on the ground, dazed from the blast. Another was stumbling away from the explosion site. Where was the third? They reached the shelter. The animals were terrified, eyes rolling white, but Caleb managed to get bridles on 2 of the horses. No time for saddles, no time for anything but survival. "Can you ride bareback?" he asked Clara. "I'll learn." Caleb boosted her onto the larger horse, then swung onto the other. Behind them, the cabin was collapsing in flames. Everything he owned, everything he'd built, all of it gone. No time to mourn it now. "Ride!" he shouted. They spurred the horses toward the eastern trail, the one that led down through the narrow canyon and eventually to Georgetown. It was treacherous in good weather, deadly in winter, but it was also the route Crow's men wouldn't expect. Gunshots followed them. Caleb heard bullets whining past, heard Clara cry out, but she didn't fall so she couldn't be hit bad. They plunged into the trees, branches whipping at their faces, the horses struggling through deep snow. Behind them, Crow was screaming orders. The Pinkertons would be mounting up, following. But Caleb knew these trails, and they didn't. That was the only advantage he had. They rode hard for an hour, pushing the horses beyond what was safe. Finally, when Caleb judged they'd put enough distance between themselves and pursuit, he slowed to a walk. Clara pulled alongside him, her face pale, her hands shaking. "You hurt?" Caleb asked. "No, scared, but not hurt." She looked back the way they'd come. "Did we lose them?" "For now, but they'll track us. Snow this deep, we can't hide our trail." "Then we keep moving." "The horses need rest. So do we." "We don't have time. We make time, or the horses die and we're on foot, which means we die." Caleb guided his horse into a sheltered hollow where an overhang provided some protection from the wind. 15 minutes. Then we go. They dismounted. Caleb checked the horses for injuries while Clara kept watch, the Winchester across her knees. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say? Everything had gone to hell in the space of an hour. "I'm sorry," Clara said finally. "About your cabin. Everything you lost. It's just wood and tools. Can rebuild." "Can you?" Caleb looked at her. "Can I what?" "Rebuild. After this. After everything that's going to happen." Clara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Caleb, I've destroyed your life. Your home is gone. You're running from the law. And if we don't make it to Denver, then we make it to Denver. It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple." Caleb finished checking the horses and walked over to where Clara sat. "You want to know the truth? That cabin was just a place to survive. Before you showed up, that's all I did. Survive. Get through another day, another winter, another year alone on that mountain." He crouched down beside her. "But you changed that. Made me remember there's more to living than just not dying. So you threw away everything for me?" "I didn't throw it away. I chose you over it. There's a difference." Clara wiped her eyes. "What if we don't make it?" "Then we don't, but at least we tried." Caleb stood up. "Come on. 15 minutes is up." They rode through the night, following trails that were more memory than reality under the snow. Caleb navigated by starlight and instinct, Clara close behind him, both of them silent except for the occasional warning about obstacles. The temperature dropped until their breath froze in the air, until their hands went numb even inside gloves. But they kept moving. Dawn found them halfway down the mountain, the horses exhausted and both riders swaying from fatigue. Caleb called a halt in a cave he remembered from his trapping days. It wasn't much, just a shallow depression in the rock, but it was shelter, and right now that was everything. They built a small fire using deadwood from the cave entrance, just enough to warm their hands. Clara pulled out some of the food they'd managed to grab, dried meat and hard biscuit that tasted like sawdust but filled the stomach. "How far to Georgetown?" she asked. 8, maybe 10 miles. We could make it by afternoon if the weather holds." "Will it?" Caleb studied the sky through the cave opening, more clouds building to the north. "Probably not. We've got maybe 6 hours before the next storm hits. Then we need to move faster. The horses can't go faster. They're already running on fumes." Clara was quiet for a moment. "What happens when Crow catches up?" "We fight. 3 of them, 2 of us, and we're down to maybe 20 bullets. So we make them count." "Caleb, this is insane. We should split up. You take the horses, I'll go on foot. Give you a better chance." "Stop." Caleb's voice was sharp. "Stop trying to sacrifice yourself. We're in this together, remember? You said it yourself back at the cabin. That was before I understood what it would cost you." "I understood the cost when I made the choice." Caleb moved closer to the fire, holding his hands out to the meager warmth. "Clara, I've spent 15 years on that mountain. 15 years alone telling myself I preferred it that way. That needing people was weakness. That isolation was strength." He looked at her. "You know what I learned in the last 2 months?" "What?" "That I was wrong. About all of it." Caleb fed another stick to the fire. "When those wolves came, when you grabbed that rifle and stepped outside even though you were terrified, that's when I knew. You're stronger than I ever was. And if you can be that brave, then I can be brave enough to see this through." Clara's expression crumpled. "I shot those wolves because I was protecting what was mine, the cabin, the animals, you, all of it, and now it's gone. The cabin's gone, the animals are gone, but I'm still here, so are you. That's what matters." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle and the wind howl outside. Finally, Clara spoke again. "Tell me about Denver, about the federal judge, Harrison Vale. He's got a reputation for being honest, which in Denver is about as rare as summer snow. Used to be a lawyer before he got appointed to the bench. Took on some cases against the railroad companies, won a few, made enemies." Caleb added more wood to the fire. "If anyone can stand up to Barron, it's him. And if we can reach him, then maybe those ledgers actually mean something. Maybe people get justice." "Justice," Clara laughed bitterly. "I used to believe in that, before I saw how much money it takes to buy your way out of consequences. That's why we're doing this, right? To prove money doesn't buy everything? Or to die trying. There's worse ways to go." Clara looked at him. "You really believe that? That this is worth dying for?" Caleb thought about it. About the cabin burning, about running through the night, about everything he'd given up in the last 12 hours. A practical man would call it insanity. A smart man would have handed Clara over and saved himself. But Caleb had stopped being either of those things the moment he'd chosen her over survival. "Yeah," he said. "I do." They rested for another hour, then mounted up and continued down the mountain. The trail got steeper, more treacherous. Twice the horses nearly lost their footing on ice-covered rocks. Clara's mount stumbled badly once, and only her quick reflexes kept her from being thrown. But they made progress. By early afternoon, Caleb could see Georgetown in the valley below. The small mining town looked like a child's toy from this height, buildings scattered along the frozen creek, smoke rising from a dozen chimneys. Civilization, safety, assuming they could reach it before Crow caught up. "We're going to make it," Clara said, hope creeping into her voice. Caleb didn't answer. He was watching the trail behind them, where 3 dark shapes had just emerged from the tree line about a mile back. Crow had found them. "Ride," Caleb said, "fast as the horses can manage." "But you said—" "I know what I said. Plans change. Move!" They urged the exhausted horses into a gallop, racing down the mountainside with reckless speed. The trail was barely wide enough for 1 horse, let alone 2 running flat out. Caleb heard rocks tumbling down the slope, heard his horse's labored breathing, felt the animal stumbling with fatigue. A gunshot cracked across the canyon. The bullet hit rock near Clara's horse. The animal shied violently, nearly going over the edge. Clara held on through pure determination, pulling the horse back from the precipice. Another shot, closer this time. Caleb looked back. Crow and his men were gaining, their fresher horses making up distance with every stride. The Pinkerton detective was in the lead, his face set with grim determination. They weren't going to make it, not like this. "Clara," Caleb shouted, "when we hit the bottom, you keep riding, don't stop, don't look back. Get to the federal marshal's office. It's the brick building on Main Street." "What are you doing?" "Buying you time." "No, Caleb, no! It's the only way, you know it is." Before Clara could argue, Caleb yanked his horse to the side into a narrow gap between rocks. He dismounted fast, pulling his rifle, taking up a position that gave him a clear view of the trail above. Clara pulled her horse to a stop. "I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice. Those ledgers get to Vale, or none of this matters. Everything we did, everything we lost, it's all for nothing if you don't finish this." "Then we both finish it." "There's no time to argue. They're coming." Caleb chambered around. "I'll hold them as long as I can. You ride hard. You can make town before they catch up." Tears were streaming down Clara's face now. "This isn't fair." "Life isn't fair, but it's worth fighting for anyway." Caleb smiled at her. "You taught me that." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out one of the ledgers. "Take this. If they kill me before I reach town, you'll have evidence." "I'm not going to—" "Take it." She threw the book to him. Caleb caught it reflexively. "And when this is over, when Barron's in prison and the story's told, you tell them about us, about what we did up here." Clara, But she'd already spurred her horse back into motion, racing down the trail toward Georgetown. Caleb watched her go, this woman who'd arrived frightened and unprepared and had somehow become the bravest person he'd ever known. Then he turned his attention to the trail above. Crow appeared first, his horse breathing hard from the chase. He saw Caleb immediately, saw the rifle aimed at his chest, and pulled up short. His two companions stopped behind him. "End of the line, Mercer," Crow called out. "For one of us? Yeah." "Where's the woman?" "Gone. And you're not following." Crow smiled. "You planning to shoot all three of us before we shoot you?" "If I have to." "That's suicide." "Probably. But you'll die first, and that's enough for me." Crow considered this. "You're a fool, dying for a woman who used you. She's a thief and a liar, Mercer. She stole from one of the most powerful men in this country. Did she tell you that? Did she mention that Barron's friends include senators, judges, police chiefs?" "She told me enough." "Then you know fighting this is pointless. Even if she reaches Denver, even if she finds Vale, it won't matter. Barron's already made arrangements. The ledgers will disappear, the woman will disappear, and this whole mess gets buried." "Maybe, or maybe you're wrong." "I'm not wrong. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know how the world works." Crow shifted in his saddle. "Last chance. Tell me which way she went, and I'll let you walk away. You can go back to your mountain, rebuild your cabin, forget any of this happened." "Can't do that." "Why not?" "Because she's my wife, and I don't abandon my own." Crow sighed. "Then you're going to die for nothing." He went for his gun. Caleb was faster. The rifle cracked once, and Crow tumbled from his saddle, blood blooming across his chest. The two Pinkertons behind him scattered, taking cover behind rocks. Caleb didn't wait to see if Crow was dead. He fired twice more, keeping them pinned, then abandoned his position and ran. Bullets chased him as he scrambled down the rocky slope. He could hear the Pinkertons shouting, hear their horses struggling to navigate the terrain. But Caleb knew this mountain, knew every shortcut, every hidden path. He lost them in a maze of boulders, circled back, found a different trail. By the time he reached the bottom, he'd put a half-mile between himself and pursuit. His horse was gone, probably spooked by the gunfire, but he could still make town on foot if he moved fast. Caleb ran. His lungs burned, his legs felt like iron. But he kept moving, because somewhere ahead Clara was racing toward Georgetown with evidence that could topple an empire, and she needed him to survive long enough to make sure she made it. He could see the town now, close enough to make out individual buildings. The federal marshal's office was there. Clara had to be there. She had to have made it. A horse thundered up behind him. Caleb spun, bringing up his rifle, but the rider was already on him. They crashed together into the frozen ground, Caleb's rifle skittering away across the ice. He recognized the face above him, one of Crow's men, the smaller one, but still plenty big enough to be dangerous. Both of them beyond exhaustion, but fueled by desperation. The Pinkerton got his hands around Caleb's throat, squeezing. Caleb's vision started to gray at the edges. He fumbled for the knife at his belt, found it, drove it up into the man's ribs. The Pinkerton gasped, his grip loosening. Caleb shoved him off and staggered to his feet, breathing hard. The man wasn't dead, but he was down, curled around the wound, not getting up anytime soon. Caleb grabbed his rifle and kept running. Georgetown's main street was busy with afternoon traffic when he stumbled into town. People stared at him, this wild-eyed man covered in blood and snow, carrying a rifle, looking like death itself. "Where's the marshal's office?" Caleb gasped at the first person he saw. The man pointed. Caleb ran. He burst through the marshal's door and found Clara there, sitting at a desk across from a gray-haired man in a badge. The ledgers were spread out in front of them. Clara looked up when Caleb entered, and the relief on her face was so profound it nearly broke him. "You made it," she said. "So did you." The marshal stood up, his hand going to his gun. "Who the hell are you?" "Are Caleb Mercer. I'm with her." Caleb pulled the third ledger from his coat and dropped it on the desk. "And we've got evidence of murder, theft, and corruption that goes all the way to the top. You interested?" The marshal looked at the ledgers, at Clara, at Caleb. "I'm listening." Over the next 2 hours, they told the story. Everything. Clara's work for Barron, the crime she'd witnessed, the evidence she'd gathered. Caleb filled in the details about Crow's pursuit, the attack on the cabin, the chase down the mountain. The marshal listened without interrupting. When they finished, he sat back and studied them both. "This is one hell of a story," he said finally. "It's true," Clara said. "Every word. And if you check those ledgers, you'll find documented proof of everything I've claimed." "Oh, I believe you. Problem is, Edwin Barron's got friends in high places. You're asking me to go after one of the richest, most connected men in the territory. I'm asking you to do your job." The marshal smiled slightly. "Fair enough." He stood up and gathered the ledgers. "I'm going to send a telegram to Federal Judge Harrison Vale in Denver. He's been looking for a reason to go after the railroad companies for years. This might be exactly what he needs." "What about us?" Caleb asked. "Crow's men are still out there. You're under protective custody as of now. I've got a cell in back where you can rest while I make arrangements to transport you to Denver safely. It's not comfortable, but it's secure." "We'll take it," Clara said. The marshal led them to a small cell at the back of the office. It was exactly what he'd promised. Not comfortable, but safe. As the door clanged shut, Caleb felt exhaustion wash over him like a wave. He sat down on the narrow cot. Clara sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "We did it," she said quietly. "Not yet. Still got to get these ledgers to Vale." "But we made it this far, that's something." Caleb looked at her. Really looked at her. This woman who'd stepped off a train 2 months ago looking like a strong breeze would break her. She had blood on her coat, bruises on her face, and eyes that had seen too much violence. But she was still here. Still fighting. "Yeah," he said. "Something." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "What happens after, when this is all over? Assuming we survive?" "Assuming that." Caleb thought about it. "Rebuild, I guess. Find a new place. Start over. Together? If you want." "I want." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, Caleb could hear the marshal moving around, the sound of him writing telegrams, making arrangements. The machinery of justice slowly turning. "Caleb?" Clara said. "Yeah? Back on the mountain when you sent me ahead, you were ready to die. I was ready to do what needed doing. That's the same thing." "Maybe." Caleb shifted to look at her. "But I didn't. Die, I mean. So maybe we get a different ending than the one we expected." "What kind of ending?" "The kind where we both survive, where those ledgers put Barron in prison, where we build something new together, something that's ours." Clara smiled. "That's a nice story." "Could be more than a story." "Could be." 2 days later, they rode to Denver under federal marshal escort. 4 armed deputies, a reinforced coach, and instructions to shoot first if anyone tried to stop them. The journey took 12 hours, every mile of it tense, but they made it without incident. Judge Harrison Vale was waiting when they arrived. He was a thin man with sharp eyes and the kind of face that suggested he didn't suffer fools. He took the ledgers from Clara personally, spent 6 hours reviewing them, and emerged from his chambers with an expression like thunder. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "what you've brought me is enough to destroy Edwin Barron's empire 10 times over. Murder for hire, land fraud, bribery of public officials, witness intimidation, the list goes on." "Can you prosecute?" Clara asked. "Oh, I can do better than that. I can guarantee he never sees daylight again." Vale's smile was cold. "Barron's been untouchable for years because no one could prove what he was doing. You just gave me everything I need." "What about Clara?" Caleb asked. "She's been accused of theft. Those charges will be dropped. In fact, Mrs. Mercer will receive a full pardon and a reward. The territory's been trying to stop the railroad corruption for years. She's a hero, not a criminal." Clara sagged with relief. Caleb caught her elbow, steadying her. "When does this go public?" he asked. "Tomorrow. Arrest warrants are already being prepared. By this time next week, Barron and 24 of his associates will be in federal custody." It happened exactly like Vale promised. The newspapers exploded with the story. Edwin Barron was arrested at his mansion, dragged out in chains while reporters shouted questions. His business partners scattered like roaches when the lights came on. The trials lasted months, but every single one ended in conviction. Clara testified at the main trial. Caleb sat in the gallery and watched her face down Barron's lawyers, answer every question with precision, refused to be intimidated by men who'd built careers on intimidation. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Barron got life in prison. His empire was dismantled, his assets seized. The families he'd victimized received compensation. Justice, real justice, for the first time in years. And Clara Mercer walked out of that courthouse a free woman. Caleb was waiting outside. Clara saw him and smiled. That same smile he'd first seen in the cabin after the storm, the one that had told him everything was going to be different now. "Ready?" he asked. "For what?" "To go home." Clara looked confused. "The cabin burned, remember?" "I know, but I've been thinking." Caleb pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. "The territorial government's offering land grants to settlers willing to develop property. I filed for a claim, 50 acres on the south slope of Black Ridge, good timber, water rights, everything we'd need to build something real." "We?" "Yeah, we." Caleb held out his hand. "If you want." Clara took his hand without hesitation. "I want." They left Denver the next morning. Not running this time, not hiding, just 2 people heading home to build a life together. The new cabin went up slow. Caleb did most of the heavy work, but Clara helped with everything she could manage. She'd learned construction during those first brutal months, and now she put that knowledge to use. They built it better than before, stronger walls, better insulation, a real foundation that would last. By the time spring arrived, they had a home. It wasn't much, just timber and glass and a stone chimney that drew smoke properly. But it was theirs, built with their own hands, paid for with money Clara had received as reward for bringing down Barron. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Clara spoke. "Do you ever regret it? Everything that happened?" "Which part?" "All of it. The cabin burning, the running, the fighting. You lost everything you'd built." Caleb thought about it. About the isolation he'd chosen, the loneliness he'd pretended was strength, the empty years before Clara had stepped off that train. "No," he said. "I don't regret any of it." "Why not?" "Because I got you instead, and that's a better trade than I deserved." Clara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other, I think." "Yeah, I think we did." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over Black Ridge. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. But it was just a wolf. Not a threat, not a siege, just an animal singing to the moon. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, they felt safe. The peace lasted exactly 3 weeks. Caleb was checking the new fence line when he saw the rider coming up the mountain trail. Just one man, moving slow, hands visible on the reins. Not aggressive, but not casual either. The kind of approach that said business, not pleasure. Caleb walked back to the cabin and grabbed his rifle. Clara looked up from the garden plot she'd been preparing, still mostly frozen ground and hope at this point, but she'd insisted on planning for summer vegetables. "Company?" she asked. "Looks like. Stay close to the house." The rider reached the clearing and stopped about 30 feet out. He was older, maybe 50, with gray in his beard and the kind of weathered face that came from years outdoors. He wore a marshal's badge. "Caleb Mercer?" the man called. "Depends who's asking." "Name's Thomas Grant, federal marshal out of Denver. Judge Vale sent me." Caleb kept the rifle ready. "Why?" "To deliver a message. And a warning." Grant dismounted slowly, keeping his hands where Caleb could see them. "Mind if I come closer? This conversation's better had face-to-face." Caleb considered it, then nodded. Grant walked his horse forward, stopping when Caleb held up a hand. Clara had come to stand in the doorway now, watching. "The message first," Grant said. "Judge Vale wanted you to know the Barron trial's over. Guilty on all counts, like you probably heard. The judge also wanted to thank you and Mrs. Mercer for your testimony, said it made the difference." "We heard about the verdict," Caleb said. "What's the warning?" Grant's expression darkened. "Edwin Barron died in prison last night. Killed himself before sentencing." The words hung in the cold air. Clara had gone very still in the doorway. "That's convenient," Caleb said carefully. "That's what I thought too. But here's the thing. The official report says suicide, and maybe it was. Barron was looking at spending the rest of his life in a cell. Some men can't face that." Grant paused. "But before he died, he made some threats. Said his business partners wouldn't let this stand. Said people who'd crossed him would regret it." "He had business partners?" Clara asked, her voice steady but tight. "I thought they all scattered when the indictments came down." "Most did, but there's always someone who thinks they can profit from someone else's fall." Grant pulled a folded paper from his coat. Judge Vale compiled a list of known associates who might still be loyal to Barron's interests. Most are in custody or running scared, but there are 3 names we can't account for. He handed the paper to Caleb. 3 names, 3 brief descriptions. Caleb recognized one of them, Roland Thatcher, Barron's former head of security, the kind of man who solved problems with violence first and questions never. "You think they'll come after us?" Caleb asked. "I think it's possible. Barron's empire is destroyed, but empires leave behind debts and grudges. Some of these men might want revenge. Others might think Mrs. Mercer knows more than she revealed in court." Grant looked at Clara. "Do you? Know more, I mean?" Clara shook her head. "I gave Vale everything, every ledger, every document I'd hidden. There's nothing left. But they don't know that." "No," she admitted. "They don't." Grant shifted his weight. "Judge Vale's offering protection. You could come back to Denver, stay under federal custody until we track down these men." "For how long?" Caleb asked. "Weeks. Maybe months. However long it takes. That's not living, that's hiding. It's staying alive, which seems preferable to the alternative." Caleb looked at Clara. She met his eyes, and he saw the same thought reflected there. They hadn't fought this hard, survived this much, just to spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. "We'll take our chances here," Caleb said. Grant didn't look surprised. "Vale thought you might say that, so here's the compromise. I'm authorized to stay in the area, not on your property, but close enough to help if trouble comes. There's an old prospector's cabin about 2 miles down the valley. I'll base there. Keep watch." "We don't need a babysitter," Clara said. "Maybe not, but you've got one anyway. Judge's orders." Grant gathered his reins. "I'll check in every few days. You see anything suspicious, anyone you don't recognize, anything that feels wrong, you fire 3 shots. I'll come running. And if we don't want you here, then you tell the judge yourself. Until then, I've got my assignment." Grant tipped his hat. "Ma'am, Mercer." He rode away before either of them could argue further. Caleb watched him disappear down the trail, then turned to Clara. "What do you think?" "I think we just traded one problem for another." Clara came down from the porch, hugging herself against the cold. "We got rid of Barron, but his people are still out there, and now we've got a federal marshal camped on our doorstep. Grant seems all right." So did Crow. At first, Caleb couldn't argue with that. They went back inside, but the easy peace of the morning was gone. The cabin felt smaller somehow, more vulnerable. Caleb found himself checking the windows more often, watching the tree line for movement. That night, neither of them slept well. The next few days passed without incident. Grant kept his word about staying away, though Caleb spotted him once while checking trap lines, just a distant figure on horseback, scanning the valley. The marshal raised a hand in greeting. Caleb returned it and kept moving. Clara threw herself into work on the homestead. She finished preparing the garden plot, started organizing the interior of the cabin with the kind of systematic efficiency that came from her accounting background. Everything had a place. Everything was labeled. It was almost obsessive. "You're nesting," Caleb said one evening, watching her reorganize the food stores for the third time. "I'm organizing." "You're worrying." Clara stopped what she was doing. "Aren't you?" "Yeah, but worrying won't change anything. It might help us be prepared. We're as prepared as we're going to get. We've got weapons, ammunition, a federal marshal watching our backs, and both of us know how to fight." Caleb moved to where she stood. "What we need now is to keep living, not hide inside waiting for something that might never come." Clara was quiet for a moment. "What if it does come? What if Thatcher or one of the others shows up? Then we handle it, same way we handled everything else. We barely survived last time, but we did survive. That's the part that matters." Clara looked at him, and Caleb saw the fear there. Not the surface fear of danger, but something deeper. The fear of losing what they'd built, of having it all torn away just when it was starting to feel real. "Hey," he said softly, "we're going to be all right." "You can't know that." "No, but I can believe it. And right now, that's enough." 2 weeks passed. Then 3. The mountain thawed slowly, spring creeping up the slopes in patches of green and brown. Clara's garden started to show signs of life. Small shoots pushing through the soil. The trap lines produced steady income. Life fell into a rhythm that almost felt normal. Caleb started to believe maybe Grant had been overly cautious. Maybe Barron's associates had scattered for good. Maybe the threat was just that, a threat, all noise and no follow-through. He should have known better. It happened on a Thursday, mid-morning. Caleb was working on expanding the barn when he heard Clara scream. He dropped his tools and ran. Found her standing outside the cabin, staring at something on the porch. When he got close enough to see, his blood went cold. A dead rabbit, gutted and arranged in a pattern that was unmistakably deliberate. And pinned to its chest with a knife was a note. Caleb pulled the knife free and read the message. 5 words in crude handwriting. "You should have stayed silent." "Someone was here," Clara said, her voice shaking. "While we were both outside, someone got close enough to leave this." Caleb scanned the clearing, the tree line, anywhere an intruder could have approached from. Nothing. Whoever had done this was already gone. "Get inside," he said. "Load the rifles." Clara didn't argue. Caleb grabbed the Winchester and circled the property, looking for tracks, signs of passage, anything that would tell him who'd been here. He found boot prints near the back of the cabin, fresh ones, deeper than his own. Someone heavy, moving carefully. The trail led into the forest and disappeared. Caleb fired 3 shots in rapid succession. Grant arrived within 20 minutes, his horse lathered from the hard ride. Caleb showed him the rabbit, the note, the tracks. "Thatcher," Grant said immediately. "This is his style. Psychological warfare before the real attack." "How do you know?" "Because I've been hunting the bastard for 2 years. This is what he does. Makes you scared, makes you paranoid, then comes at you when your guard's down." Grant studied the tracks. "He's testing your defenses, seeing how you react. Then let's give him a reaction. We track him down, end this now. That's what he wants. You go chasing into the woods, you're on his territory. He knows these mountains as well as you do, maybe better. He'll pick you off before you get within rifle range." "So what do we do?" Clara asked. She'd come outside despite Caleb's orders, the Winchester in her hands. "We wait. Make him come to us on our terms, not his." Grant looked around the clearing. "Your cabin's defensible, but barely. We need to improve your position before he makes his move." They spent the rest of the day fortifying. Grant proved surprisingly useful. He'd served in the war, knew tactics and strategy. Together with Caleb, they reinforced the cabin's weak points, created firing positions with clear sight lines, established fallback routes if the cabin became untenable. Clara worked alongside them, learning, adapting, her fear transforming into focused determination. Caleb watched her dig a rifle pit near the barn and felt a surge of pride. This was who she'd become, someone who faced threats head-on instead of running. As night fell, Grant prepared to head back to his own cabin. "You could stay here," Caleb offered. "3 guns better than 2. Thatcher's watching. He sees a federal marshal bedding down here. He'll know we're onto him. Better if he thinks you're alone, thinks you're scared." Grant mounted his horse. "But I'll be close. Anything happens, you fire those shots." After he left, Caleb and Clara sat in the dark cabin, weapons within reach, listening to every sound outside. The wind in the pines could have been footsteps. The crack of a branch could have been a rifle being cocked. Every shadow held potential danger. "This is what he wants," Clara said quietly. "To make us afraid in our own home. I know. We can't live like this. We won't have to, not for long." Caleb checked his rifle for the 10th time. "Thatcher will make his move soon. Men like him don't have patience for long games." "How do you know?" "Because he's angry. Barron was his employer, his meal ticket. Now Barron's dead and Thatcher's out of work. He wants revenge, and he wants it fast before we can call in more help." Clara absorbed this. "So we're bait. We're ready. There's a difference." The attack came 3 nights later. Caleb woke to the smell of smoke. Not wood smoke from the stove, something else, something chemical. He was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle, shaking Clara awake. "Fire," he said. "Outside." They stumbled to the window. Through the darkness, Caleb could see flames rising from the barn. Someone had set it ablaze. "It's a diversion," Clara said. "He wants us outside. The animals are already dead or running. This is about drawing us out." She was right, but that didn't make watching the barn burn any easier. Caleb had just finished building it, had poured weeks of work into making it solid and weatherproof. Now it was just kindling. "There," Clara said, pointing. "Movement by the tree line." Caleb saw it, a figure darting between shadows, circling toward the cabin's blind side. He aimed and fired. The figure dropped, but Caleb couldn't tell if he'd hit it or if it had just taken cover. "How many?" Clara asked. "Don't know. At least 2. 1 to set the fire, 1 to circle around." "Thatcher doesn't work alone?" "Apparently not." Glass shattered in the back room. Someone had thrown something through the window. Caleb ran to investigate and found a burning torch on the floor, flames already spreading to the dry wood. "Get water," he shouted. Clara was already moving, but they both knew it was too late. The fire was spreading too fast, fed by the pitch-soaked torch. Within minutes, the back wall was engulfed. "We have to leave," Clara said. "That's what he wants. We stay here, we burn, we leave, we might survive." Caleb hated that she was right again. "The root cellar. We can hide there until Grant arrives." They grabbed what they could, weapons, ammunition, the satchel with their important papers, and ran for the cellar door at the side of the cabin. Caleb threw it open and practically shoved Clara down the ladder, following close behind. The cellar was small, dark, and cold. But it was underground, stone-walled, and safe from the fire above. They could hear the cabin burning, hear the crash as parts of the roof collapsed. All that work, all those weeks of building, gone in minutes. "Fire the signal," Clara said. 3 shots. Caleb aimed his rifle up through the cellar door and fired 3 times. The shots echoed across the valley, carrying down to where Grant should be waiting. Now they just had to survive until help arrived. Footsteps above. Someone walking through the burning cabin, boots crunching on debris. Then a voice, rough and amused. "Mercer, I know you're down there. Come on out and let's talk like civilized people." Caleb didn't answer. "No? All right then. Let me introduce myself properly. Name's Roland Thatcher, used to work for Edwin Barron before your wife destroyed everything I'd built." The footsteps moved closer to the cellar door. "She cost me my job, my reputation, my future. Seems only fair I return the favor." "You want me," Clara called up. "Let Caleb go. This is between us." Thatcher laughed. "Now why would I do that? You two are a package deal, like bread and butter. Can't have one without the other." "What do you want?" Caleb asked. "Want? I wanted Edwin Barron to keep running his empire. I wanted my comfortable position, my good salary, My nice life in Denver, but your wife took that away. Thatcher's voice hardened. So now I want her to suffer the way Barron suffered. I want her to lose everything, just like he did. He killed himself. That's not on us. He killed himself because you destroyed him, because she... Thatcher stopped, took a breath. When he spoke again, his voice was calmer. You know what? This is boring. I'm just going to smoke you out. Something heavy landed on the cellar door, then another something. The smell of oil reached Caleb's nose just before he heard the match strike. No! Clara screamed. Flames erupted above them, blocking the exit. Smoke poured into the cellar, thick and choking. Caleb pulled Clara back into the farthest corner, both of them coughing, eyes streaming. There's another way out, Clara gasped. The air vent on the north wall. Caleb had forgotten about it. A narrow shaft that led to the surface, meant for ventilation. Too small for a person to climb through, but maybe wide enough to shoot through. He found it by feel in the smoke-filled darkness. The metal grate came off easily, and blessed cool air flowed in. Caleb stuck his rifle barrel through the opening and fired blind, hoping to hit anything or anyone above. Shouts from outside, the sound of running feet, more gunfire, but not aimed at the cellar, aimed somewhere else. Grant had arrived. The next few minutes were chaos. Caleb could hear fighting above, could hear Grant's voice shouting orders, could hear at least 2 other men. Thatcher hadn't come alone. The smoke in the cellar was getting worse, but the fire on the door had died down enough that Caleb thought they could risk it. Stay behind me, he told Clara. They climbed the ladder together. Caleb kicked the burning debris aside and emerged into the ruins of their cabin. Everything was destroyed. Walls collapsed, roof gone, just fire and ash in the frame of what used to be their home. But they were alive. Grant was grappling with someone near the barn. Thatcher, Caleb realized. The federal marshal had the bigger man in a headlock, but Thatcher was fighting with desperate strength. Where were the others? Caleb got his answer when a bullet punched past his ear. He spun and saw a man taking aim from behind the woodpile. Caleb fired back, his shot going wide. Clara fired too, her bullet hitting closer. The man ducked. Then Grant's gun went off, and Thatcher dropped. The federal marshal staggered back, breathing hard, blood running from a cut on his forehead. Behind you! Clara screamed. Caleb turned. The man from the woodpile had circled around, was raising his pistol, aiming at Grant's back. Caleb didn't think, just moved, put himself between the gunman and the marshal and fired. The gunman went down. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the crackle of flames and the sound of harsh breathing. Caleb scanned for more threats. Found none. Just 3 bodies. Thatcher and 2 hired guns, all of them dead or dying. Grant limped over, checking each body methodically. It's over, he said finally. That's all of them. Caleb lowered his rifle. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline wearing off. Clara moved to his side and he put an arm around her, needing to feel her solid and real and alive. Their cabin was gone. The barn was ashes. Everything they'd built in the last few months had been destroyed. But they were still standing. You saved my life, Grant said to Caleb. That last one had me dead to rights. You saved ours first. We're even. Grant smiled tiredly. Fair enough. He looked around at the destruction. Hell of a night. Yeah. You 2 got somewhere to go? Somewhere safe while you rebuild? Caleb looked at Clara. We'll figure something out. Judge Vale will want to know about this, about Thatcher coming after you. Grant started walking toward his horse. I'll need you both to come to Denver. Give statements. Make it official. How long will that take? Few days, maybe a week, but Vale will make sure you're compensated for the damage here. And there might be more reward money from Barron's seized assets. Claire and Caleb exchanged glances. More time in Denver. More bureaucracy. More questions. More people wanting pieces of their story. But it was necessary. The law had rules, and they'd chosen to work within those rules when they'd taken the ledgers to Vale in the first place. We'll come, Clara said. But after that, we're done. No more trials, no more testimony, no more looking over our shoulders. After this, you won't have to. Barron's network is finished. You made sure of that. Grant found his horse and mounted up. I'll send word to Vale, arrange safe transport to Denver. Meantime, there's a boarding house in Georgetown that'll take you on federal credit. Get some rest. You've earned it. After Grant left, Caleb and Clara stood in the smoldering ruins of their home. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The same mountains that had tried to kill them, that had tested them, that had witnessed their transformation from strangers into something more. "We keep losing homes," Clara said quietly. "We keep building new ones. How many times can we do this? How many times can we start over?" Caleb pulled her closer. "As many as it takes." "I'm tired, Caleb. Tired of fighting, tired of running, tired of watching everything burn." "I know, me too." He kissed the top of her head. "But we're still here, and as long as we're still here, we can rebuild." Clara leaned into him, and they stood like that as the sun rose over Black Ridge, stood in the ashes of their second home, planning their third. Because that's what they did. They survived. They adapted. They kept moving forward even when everything said stop. A week later, they were back in Denver giving statements to Judge Vale. The judge listened to their account of Thatcher's attack, of Grant's intervention, of the deaths that had finally ended Barron's reach. "I'm sorry," Vale said when they finished. "I'd hoped relocating to the mountain would keep you safe. I didn't anticipate Barron's people would be this persistent." "It's over now, though," Clara said. "Right? There's no one left who'd come after us? No one I know of. Thatcher was the last true believer. The others have either been arrested or fled the territory entirely." Vale pushed a document across his desk. "This is the final settlement from Barron's estate. The courts have awarded you compensation for damages, plus your share of the reward for bringing down the corruption network. It's substantial." Caleb looked at the number on the paper. It was more money than he'd seen in his entire life. More than enough to rebuild, to buy livestock, to set up a real working ranch instead of a survival homestead. "What about Grant?" he asked. "He deserves a share." "Marshal Grant has already received his. This is yours, free and clear." Clara stared at the document. "We could leave Colorado, go somewhere nobody knows our names, start completely fresh." "You could," Vale agreed, "though I hope you won't. This territory needs people like you, people willing to stand up when it would be easier to stay silent." "We've stood up enough," Caleb said. "Time to just live." Vale nodded. "I understand, and for what it's worth, thank you. Both of you. What you did mattered." They left the judge's office and walked through Denver's crowded streets. The city felt alien now. Too many people. Too much noise. Caleb found himself missing the silence of the mountains, the space to breathe. "Where do we go?" Clara asked. "Back to Black Ridge. Rebuild the cabin. Better than before. Make it last this time." "You sure? After everything that's happened there?" "That's where home is. Not because of the land or the cabin, but because that's where we became us." Caleb stopped walking, turned to face her. "Unless you want to leave, go somewhere easier." Clara thought about it. "No, you're right. Black Ridge is home. For better or worse." "Probably worse, knowing our luck." She laughed. "Probably." They spent another day in Denver buying supplies, arranging for materials to be shipped to Georgetown for the rebuild. Caleb hired 2 carpenters who knew mountain construction, who could help them build something that would stand against whatever the Rockies threw at it. Then they rode back to their land. The clearing looked different in afternoon light. The ashes had settled, the burned timbers had stopped smoking. It just looked empty now. A blank canvas waiting for something new. "We build it bigger this time," Caleb said. 2 rooms, maybe 3. A real kitchen, not just a corner with a stove. Storage cellar that's actually accessible. "A porch," Clara added. "A real one where we can sit in the evenings. Windows on the south side for light. And a fence for the garden. A proper garden this time, big enough to feed us through winter." They stood there planning, imagining the home they'd build together. Not just walls and a roof, but a life, a future. The thing they'd been fighting for without quite realizing it. "It won't be easy," Clara said. "Nothing worthwhile ever is. We might fail. Winter might be too hard, or the money might run out, or we might make it, build something that lasts, grow old together on this mountain." Caleb took her hand. "I'm willing to try if you are." Clara looked at the empty space where their cabin had stood, then at the mountains rising beyond, then at the man beside her. The stranger she'd married out of desperation who'd become the most important person in her world. "Yeah," she said, "I'm willing to try." The carpenters arrived a week later and work began. This time, Caleb and Clara knew what they were doing. They'd learned from their mistakes, understood what the mountain required. The new cabin went up faster, stronger, better. Marshal Grant visited twice during construction, checking on their progress, making sure no new threats had emerged. But the mountain stayed quiet. Whatever enemies they'd had were gone, dead, imprisoned, or fled beyond reach. By midsummer, the cabin was finished. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Solid timber walls, a stone fireplace that drew smoke perfectly, windows that let in light without letting in cold. Big enough for a family, though neither Caleb nor Clara talked about that yet. One thing at a time. They moved in on a clear July evening, carrying their few possessions across the threshold of their new home. Caleb had carved their initials above the door, CM and CM, joined together. A declaration that this place belonged to both of them equally. That night, they lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the mountain. Wind in the pines, the creek running full with snowmelt, the distant call of an owl hunting. All the sounds that meant home. "Do you think it's really over?" Clara asked. "All the running and fighting and barely surviving?" "I think we get to decide that. We can keep looking for threats, or we can choose to believe we're safe." "Which do you choose?" Caleb thought about it. About Barron and Crow and Thatcher, about wolves and blizzards, and all the ways they'd almost died. About the fact that they were still here, still breathing, still together despite everything. "I choose safe," he said. "We've earned it." Clara rolled over to face him. "We did, didn't we? Earned this." "Yeah, we did." She kissed him then, soft and slow, and Caleb felt something settle in his chest. Peace. Actual peace. Not just the absence of immediate danger. The kind of peace that came from knowing you'd fought for something and won. They fell asleep tangled together, safe in their new home on Black Ridge. While outside the mountains stood guard over the life they'd built from ashes and determination and a love that had started as convenience and grown into something unbreakable. The fighting was over. The surviving had just begun. Summer turned the mountain into something Caleb barely recognized. Green everywhere, wildflowers pushing through soil that had been frozen solid just months ago. The kind of warmth that made you forget winter ever existed. Clara's garden exploded with growth. Potatoes, carrots, beans climbing up stakes Caleb had built. She worked in it every morning, dirt under her fingernails, her face flushed from sun instead of cold. Caleb watched her from the porch one August morning and realized he was happy. Actually happy, not just surviving. The feeling was so unfamiliar it took him a moment to name it. "You're staring," Clara called, without looking up. "Can't help it. You've got dirt on your nose." She wiped at it, making it worse. "Better?" "Much worse. Come here." Clara stood and walked over, stretching her back. Caleb cleaned the smudge off with his thumb, and she caught his hand, holding it against her cheek. "I like this," she said quietly. "Dirt on your face? Peace? Normalcy. Being boring." She smiled. "I never thought I'd want boring. My whole life before this was about ambition, achievement, making something of myself, and then I spent months just trying not to die. But this," she gestured at the garden, the cabin, the mountains around them, "this is what I actually wanted all along. I just didn't know it." "Boring's underrated," Caleb agreed. "Though if you get too bored, we could always—" "Don't even think about finding new trouble. We've had enough for 3 lifetimes. I was going to say we could go fishing." "Oh," Clara laughed. "Yes, fishing sounds perfect." They spent the afternoon at the creek, catching trout that Clara insisted on learning to clean herself. Her first attempt was messy, the second better. By the 4th fish, she had the technique down, working with the same methodical precision she brought to everything. "You know what's strange?" she said, elbow deep in fish guts. "A year ago, I would have fainted at this. Now it's just Tuesday." "People adapt. You adapted faster than most." "I had good motivation. Adapt or die." "You had it in you the whole time. Just needed the right circumstances to bring it out." Caleb threaded another fish onto the carrying line. "That's the thing about the frontier. It doesn't make you strong. It just shows you what you already were." Clara considered this. "What was I in Denver before all this? Probably competent. Probably good at your job. Probably underestimated by every man you worked for. That's accurate. She finished the last fish and washed her hands in the creek. I was invisible. A woman who kept books, nothing more. Baron barely knew my name, even though I handled his finances for 3 years. His mistake. His fatal mistake, as it turned out. Clara dried her hands on her apron. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing. Taking those ledgers, running, dragging you into all of this. A lot of people died because of choices I made. A lot of people were already dying because of choices Baron made. You just made sure there were consequences. Caleb gathered up their catch. And you didn't drag me anywhere. I chose to help you. I'd make the same choice again. Even knowing what it would cost? Especially knowing what it would cost. Because look what we got in return. They walked back to the cabin together as the sun dropped toward the western peaks. Caleb fried the fish while Clara made cornbread that was actually edible now, her cooking skills having improved dramatically through sheer repetition. They ate on the porch, watching the sky turn purple and gold. Marshal Grant came by while you were checking the traps yesterday, Clara said. I forgot to mention it. What did he want? Just checking in. Said the territorial governor is talking about giving us some kind of commendation for exposing Baron's corruption. A formal ceremony in Denver, medals, the whole production. Caleb snorted. What did you tell him? I told him we weren't interested, that we'd done what we had to do, and we'd prefer to be left alone. Clara broke off a piece of cornbread. He said he understood, but the governor might insist. The governor can insist all he wants from Denver. We don't have to show up. That's what I said. Clara smiled. Grant laughed, said he'd try to make the problem go away quietly. Good man, Grant. He also said something else, something about you. Caleb looked at her. What about me? He said most men would have given up their wives to Crow, taken the easy way out. But you fought for me even though you barely knew me, even though it cost you everything. Claire's voice got quieter. He asked me if I understood how rare that was, how lucky I was. You're not lucky. You survived hell before you ever met me. I survived. I didn't live. There's a difference. She set down her plate and turned to face him. Caleb, before I came here, I thought I knew what I wanted. Security, respectability, maybe marriage to some boring accountant who'd give me a comfortable life. But what I actually needed was someone who'd choose me when it mattered. Who'd see me not as a burden or a prize, but as an equal. You gave me that. Caleb didn't know what to say to that. Emotions weren't his strong suit. He was better with actions than words. So he took her hand instead, lacing his fingers through hers, hoping she understood what he couldn't articulate. They sat like that as full dark fell and the stars came out. So many stars you could barely see the black between them. The same stars that had watched them fight, survive, and somehow find each other in the process. I'm pregnant, Clara said into the silence. Caleb's brain stopped working for a solid 10 seconds. Then it restarted all at once, flooding him with questions, panic, and something that might have been joy. How long have you? About 6 weeks, I think. I wasn't sure at first, but now I am. Clara was watching him carefully. I know we never discussed this. I know it complicates things. If you're not ready, are you ready? I don't know, terrified mostly. I don't know anything about being a mother, and bringing a child into this life, on this mountain. She stopped. But I want to try. If you do. Caleb thought about everything that could go wrong, thought about harsh winters and dangerous wildlife, and the isolation that made medical help a day's ride away in good weather. Thought about all the ways the frontier killed unprepared people, and how a baby was about as unprepared as you could get. Then he thought about Clara facing down wolves, Clara surviving Crow's siege, Clara building a life from nothing because she refused to quit. If anyone could raise a child in this wilderness and make it work, it was her. Yeah, he said finally. I want to try. Clara's relief was visible. Really? Really? Though I don't know anything about babies either, so we'll both be figuring it out as we go. That seems to be our specialty, figuring things out as we go. Caleb pulled her close, his hand resting on her stomach where their child was growing. A child who'd be born into hardship, but also into love, into parents who'd survived impossible things together and come out stronger. We should probably make the cabin bigger, he said. Add another room before winter. And get more supplies, baby things. I don't even know what babies need. Neither do I. We'll ask someone in Georgetown. Will people think we're crazy? Having a baby up here? Probably, but people already think we're crazy for staying after everything that happened. Caleb kissed her temple. Let them think what they want. This is our life. The pregnancy changed things in ways both expected and surprising. Clara had good days and brutal days, mornings when she couldn't keep food down and afternoons when she ate everything in sight. Caleb learned to cook more varied meals, to stock foods that didn't make her sick, to rub her back when she was uncomfortable. He also learned that pregnant women had opinions about everything. The cradle needs to be by the window, Clara said one September morning. I haven't even built the cradle yet. But when you do, it goes by the window. Babies need light. Babies need warmth more than light. It should be near the stove. That's too hot. Babies overheat easily. How do you know that? I read it in a book I got from Mrs. Henderson in Georgetown. She raised 6 children. She knows things. Caleb looked at the stack of books Clara had acquired. Guides to childbirth, infant care, childhood diseases. She'd approached impending motherhood the same way she'd approached frontier survival, with research, preparation, and systematic organization. Fine, he said. Window it is. But if the baby freezes, the baby will not freeze. I'll make sure of it. Caleb built the cradle over the next week, working with wood he'd been saving for furniture. He carved small animals into the headboard, a wolf, a deer, a bear, representatives of the mountain that would be this child's home. Clara cried when she saw it, hormones making her emotional about everything. It's beautiful, she said, running her fingers over the carvings. It's just wood. It's not just wood. It's you building something for our child. That's everything. News of the pregnancy spread through Georgetown despite their attempts at privacy. Frontier towns thrived on gossip, and a pregnant woman living in the mountains with a reformed hermit was prime material. People Caleb barely knew started offering advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, tips for surviving childbirth in isolation. You should come to town for the birth, Mrs. Henderson said when Clara visited in October. Stay with me the last month. I've helped deliver dozens of babies. It's safer than being up on that mountain. Clara thanked her but refused. Caleb will be there. And if something goes wrong, we're only a few hours from town. A few hours might be too long if there's complications. Then we'll handle the complications. We've handled everything else. But privately, Clara admitted her fears to Caleb. What if something does go wrong? What if I can't do this? Then we get help. We ride to Georgetown, we find the doctor, we do whatever we have to do. And if there's no time, then I deliver the baby myself. I've birthed foals and calves. Can't be that different. Clara stared at him. That is possibly the least reassuring thing you've ever said. You want me to lie and say it'll be easy? I want you to tell me we'll survive this. We will. You're the strongest person I've ever met. If you can survive everything you've survived, you can survive this too. Winter came early that year, first snow falling in mid-November. Caleb worked constantly to prepare, stockpiling firewood, securing the barn, making sure they had enough food and supplies to last until spring if necessary. Clara helped when she could, but her growing belly made some tasks impossible. I feel useless, she complained one afternoon, watching Caleb split wood. You're growing a human. That's not useless. I'm sitting around getting fat while you do all the work. You cooked breakfast, mended my shirts, organized the entire food storage system, and made a list of supplies we need from town. You did that before noon. You're not useless. Clara smiled despite herself. I do make good lists. The best lists. Very organized, color-coded even. Don't mock my color coding. It's efficient. I would never. Caleb set down the axe and came to sit beside her. How are you feeling? Heavy, tired, anxious. She put his hand on her belly. But look, feel that? Caleb felt it, a small kick, barely perceptible. His child, moving, alive, real in a way that statistics and preparation couldn't capture. Strong, he said, takes after their mother. Let's hope so. My genetics are nothing special. Your genetics survived 36 years on this mountain. I'd say that's pretty special. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you think they'll like it here, growing up so isolated? Don't know, but they'll learn self-reliance, how to work hard, how to survive challenges. That's worth something. And they'll be lonely. No other children for miles. They'll have us. And when they're older, they can decide if they want to stay or go somewhere with more people. That's their choice. Clara was quiet for a moment. I want them to have choices. Real choices. Not desperation disguised as options. I want them to choose this life because they love it, not because they're trapped in it. Then we make sure they know they can leave, that we'll support whatever they decide. Even if they decide to leave? Especially then. That's what good parents do, right? Let their kids make their own mistakes? I don't actually know what good parents do. Mine died when I was 12. Caleb hadn't known that. Clara rarely talked about her past before Denver. I'm sorry. Influenza. It went through our town in 1869, killed about a third of the population. Clara's voice was matter of fact, the way people talked about old grief. I went to live with an aunt who didn't particularly want me. She fed me, housed me, sent me to school. But she made it clear I was an obligation, not family. That's how you ended up working for Barron? That's how I ended up believing work was the only thing that mattered. That if I was useful enough, competent enough, indispensable enough, maybe I'd matter to someone. Clara laughed bitterly. Took me years to realize that was never going to happen. I could have been the best accountant in the country, and Barron still wouldn't have seen me as a person. I see you. I know you do. That's why I stayed. She shifted position, trying to get comfortable. And that's why I want our child to know they matter. Not because of what they accomplish, but because they exist, because they're ours. They will, I promise. December brought blizzards that buried the cabin under walls of snow. Caleb spent his days digging out paths, maintaining the animals, keeping the fire burning. Clara spent hers preparing baby clothes, reading her books, and trying not to think about all the things that could go wrong during childbirth. On Christmas Day, a date they marked on the calendar but didn't celebrate with any particular ritual, Clara went into labor. It started as a backache that got progressively worse. By noon, she was having regular contractions. By evening, she was gripping the bed frame and breathing through pain that made her previous suffering look trivial. I changed my mind, she gasped between contractions. I don't want to do this. Little late for that. This was a terrible idea. Worst decision we ever made. You said that about marrying me too. Turned out all right. That's different. I could have left you. Can't exactly leave this baby inside. Caleb had boiled water, gathered clean cloths, read the childbirth chapter in Clara's medical book about 15 times. He was as prepared as an untrained man could be, which was to say, not very prepared at all. But he stayed calm, talked Clara through each contraction, let her squeeze his hand hard enough to leave bruises, reminded her to breathe when she forgot. I can't do this, Clara said around midnight, exhausted and scared. Yes, you can. You don't understand. I'm not strong enough. I'm going to die and the baby's going to die and look at me. Caleb waited until she focused on his face. You faced down Pinkerton detectives. You shot wolves. You survived 3 cabin fires and a mountain siege. You are absolutely strong enough to do this. That was different. How? I could fight those things. I can't fight this. So don't fight it. Work with it. Like you worked with the mountain when it tried to kill you. You learned its rhythms, adapted to its demands. Do the same thing now. Clara stared at him for a long moment. Then another contraction hit and she bore down, screaming through it, her whole body focused on the monumental task of bringing new life into the world. The baby was born just before dawn. A girl, small but healthy, with a surprisingly loud cry for someone so tiny. Caleb cut the cord with shaking hands, wrapped the baby in clean cloth, and placed her in Clara's arms. Clara looked down at their daughter and started crying. She's perfect. She's covered in blood and vernix. She's kind of gross, actually. She's perfect, Clara insisted. Look at her. She's ours. Caleb looked. At the tiny face, the miniature fingers, the eyes that would probably be blue like Clara's. Their daughter, born on a frozen mountain on Christmas morning, already trying to nurse despite being less than 5 minutes old. Yeah, he said softly. She's perfect. They named her Anna, after Clara's mother. Anna Mercer, who would grow up learning to survive in a place that didn't tolerate weakness, learning to love in a family that had been forged through impossible circumstances. The first few weeks were brutal. Anna cried constantly. Clara was exhausted from nursing every 2 hours. And Caleb discovered that babies produced an astounding amount of laundry for creatures so small. But they figured it out through trial and error, the same way they'd figured out everything else. By February, they'd settled into a routine. Anna slept in her cradle by the window, exactly where Clara had wanted it. She gained weight steadily, her cries becoming less desperate and more demanding. Clara recovered her strength, and Caleb learned to change diapers without gagging. "We're doing it," Clara said one evening, watching Anna sleep. "We're actually raising a child on this mountain. Turns out we're not completely incompetent, just mostly incompetent. That's all you need to be. Mostly competent, sometimes lucky." Clara smiled. "And occasionally heroic?" "That too." Spring came late but dramatic, the snow melting so fast it created floods in the valley below. Their cabin stayed dry on its ridge, and Clara's garden emerged from winter mostly intact. She planted new seeds while Anna napped in a basket nearby, protected from sun and wind. Marshal Grant visited in April with news from Denver. "The territorial governor's finally given up on the commendation ceremony," he said, accepting coffee from Caleb. "Decided you two prefer privacy to publicity." "About time he figured that out," Caleb said. "Though there is one last piece of business." Grant pulled an envelope from his coat. "This is from Judge Vale. He wanted you to have it personally." Clara opened the envelope and found a letter written in Vale's precise handwriting. She read it aloud. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, I wanted to inform you that the last of Edwin Barron's co-conspirators was convicted yesterday. The corruption network you helped expose has been completely dismantled. More than 50 families have received compensation for the land Barron stole. Several new laws have been passed to prevent similar abuses. Your courage in coming forward created changes that will protect people for generations. Thank you. Signed, Judge Harrison Vale." Clara set down the letter. "It's really over." "It's really over," Grant confirmed. "Barron's empire is gone. The people who worked for him are either in prison or scattered, and you two can finally live your lives without looking over your shoulders." After Grant left, Caleb and Clara sat on the porch watching the mountains turn gold in the sunset. Anna was nursing, making small, satisfied sounds. The garden was growing, the cabin was warm and solid. Everything they'd fought for had come down to this, ordinary moments strung together into something resembling peace. "What do you think she'll be like?" Clara asked, nodding at Anna. "When she's older?" "Strong, like her mother. Stubborn, like her father. Hopefully brave enough to leave if she wants to, smart enough to stay if she doesn't. And if she asks us about all of this someday, about Barron and the fires and everything we survived, we tell her the truth, that we did what we had to do, that sometimes the right thing costs everything, and that some things are worth the cost." Clara looked at him. "Like what?" "Like family. Like justice. Like building something real in a world that tries to burn everything down." Caleb gestured at the mountains around them. "Like this, all of this. Think she'll understand? Eventually, when she's old enough." Caleb put his arm around Clara, careful not to disturb Anna. "And if she doesn't, that's okay too. She gets to have her own story. We just gave her a beginning." The years that followed weren't easy. Frontier life never was. They endured harsh winters and crop failures and the constant work of maintaining a homestead in hostile terrain. Anna grew into a wild child who climbed trees fearlessly and learned to ride almost before she could walk. Clara taught her to read and write. Caleb taught her to shoot and track and survive. Other families moved into the valley, drawn by tales of good land and fresh starts. A small school opened in Georgetown, which Anna attended sometimes when weather permitted. She made friends, learned there was a world beyond Black Ridge, and always chose to come home. Because home was where her parents had built something from ashes, where love had survived impossible odds, where courage meant fighting for what mattered even when the cost seemed too high. On Anna's 10th birthday, Clara told her the full story. About Edwin Barron and the ledgers, about Crow and the siege, about choosing justice over safety, choosing each other over survival. Anna listened with wide eyes, then asked, "Were you scared?" "Terrified," Clara admitted. "Every day? But being scared and being helpless aren't the same thing." "What's the difference?" "Choice. I chose to fight instead of run. Your father chose to help me instead of abandoning me. And we both chose to keep building even when everything kept burning down." Clara pulled Anna close. "That's the lesson, sweetheart. Not that we were brave or special, just that we kept choosing to try. What if you'd chosen wrong? What if you died? Then we would have died fighting for something that mattered. But we didn't die. We survived. And we built this. Clara gestured at the cabin, the land, the life they'd created. All of this came from choosing to try. Anna thought about this. I'm glad you chose to try. So are we, baby. So are we. Caleb watched this exchange from the doorway and felt something settle in his chest. Not happiness, exactly. Happiness was too simple a word for what he felt. Gratitude, maybe. Or peace. Or just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that everything he'd sacrificed, everything they'd endured had been worth it. He'd started as a man who survived alone because trust seemed too dangerous. He'd ended as a husband and father who understood that the risk of loving people was nothing compared to the emptiness of safety without connection. Clara had started as a woman who believed competence could earn her a place in the world. She'd learned that some things, family, love, belonging, couldn't be earned through achievement. They could only be built through choosing each other over and over, even when the cost seemed impossible. And Anna, born from their choices, would carry forward the lesson that survival wasn't enough. That building something worth surviving for was what actually mattered. That evening, after Anna had gone to bed, Caleb and Clara sat on their porch watching stars emerge over the Rockies. The same mountains that had tested them, shaped them, witnessed their transformation from strangers into something unbreakable. Do you ever regret it? Clara asked, answering that mail-order bride advertisement. Every day, Caleb said. Clara turned to look at him, surprised. I regret that I wasted 15 years up here alone before you showed up. I regret all the time I lost being too stubborn to admit I needed someone. I regret every moment I didn't have you. He took her hand. But answering that advertisement, marrying a woman I didn't know who turned out to be the best decision I ever made, that I don't regret for a second. Smooth talker. Just honest. Clara leaned against him. You know what I don't regret? Stepping off that train even though I was terrified. Refusing to go back east even though you gave me the chance. Choosing this life with you over any alternative. She paused. Though I do regret those first few attempts at cooking. That bread could have been used as ammunition. Caleb laughed. It was pretty bad. I've gotten better. You've gotten competent at everything. That's your superpower. What's yours? Stubborn refusal to quit. It's not impressive, but it works. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen around their home. Inside, Anna slept safe and warm. Around them, the homestead stood solid against whatever challenges would come. And between them, built from desperate choices and impossible survival, was a love that had started as practicality and become something that couldn't be burned, besieged, or broken. The frontier had tried to kill them in every way possible, but they'd survived not through strength or luck or divine intervention. They'd survived through choosing each other when it would have been easier to choose themselves, through building when burning would have been simpler, through fighting for a future even when the present tried to destroy them. That was the real story. Not about heroes or villains, not about good triumphing over evil, just about two broken people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and decided that despite everything, despite fear and pain and loss, life was worth fighting for. And on a mountain in Colorado, under stars that had witnessed humanity's struggles since the beginning of time, Caleb and Clara Mercer sat together and knew they'd made the right choice. Every single time.